Okay. Hello and welcome everybody to today's meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. My name is Councillor Hollier. I'm chairing the committee. For those of you that only get your news about York from watching Audit and Governance on YouTube, we have had an election since the last one, so things have changed slightly. So I think we've literally only got one councillor who's returning to the committee, and Mr. Lee as our independent member. The rest of the committee are entirely new. So please bear with us. I think that would be appreciated. I have one apology from Councillor Whitcroft with no substitute. So if I could ask if there are any declarations of interest. Can't see any. Oh, sorry, yes, Councillor Mason, who's been substituted by Councillor Healy. I'm sorry. Okay. Move it a bit closer. Okay, so I'm going to vary the order of the agenda a little bit and move straight to public participation, which is item 4. So if we could have our first public speaker, who's Andy Mendes, if you'd like to join us straight away.
Hi. I don't usually get ahead of Gwen. And I'm not really.
I'm sure you're aware you've got 3 minutes to address the committee, and we'll give you a warning with about 30 seconds to go.
It won't take that long, unless you ask hard questions. So, okay, I'm going to pick a particular topic, but there are some general comments about it. So the particular topic is on procurement. And if you've been on the committee before, you'd know it's one of my specialist topics. So CYC spends more than 250 million a year through its procurement system. It's big money. The council has a no purchase order, no payment policy. This, in my view, sensible policy requires that expenditure has to be reviewed and the order authorised by a budget holder before commitment is made. It's good. It's what I used to do in my work. However, successive audits have shown that many invoices do not reference a purchase order when received by CYC. In the 2015-16 audit, the proportion of invoices without orders was below 20%. In 2017-18, it was 31%. The audit in 2022 found that figure was 44%, muddied by COVID as everything was, but nevertheless, 44% is a lot. This time, Max's team, in the bits that I'm allowed to see, only refer to a significant proportion of such invoices without purchase orders. So it's getting worse, is my summary. More and more expenditure is made without pre-authorization. And here's the more general point. After each audit, management accept that this is against policy, agree remedial actions, and apparently fail to deliver. There seems to be no effective sanction and not much follow-up. Certainly things are getting worse over the last nearly 10 years. You, as Councillor Hollis has said, you're a largely new committee with a responsibility for audit across CYC. This sort of thing is your opportunity to require better follow-up monitoring. Since no one else seems willing or able to enforce recommendations, please do so. Now, scrutiny of such issues by York residents, I think, is also important. So why have you or the officers now decided not to publish internal audit reports? The Act cited as a reason states that all reports are restricted by virtue of the Local Government Act 1972, specifically information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. Now, your new interpretation of CYC as a person, which is interesting, essentially, it seems to me, allows you to restrict pretty much every report. This Act was introduced in 1972, and it's been amended a few times since, but it's been in effect since 1972. Up to now, CYC has not interpreted this Act as relating to the authority. At least since 2016, we've seen all reports, except where real persons are mentioned. And in these rare cases, sections have been redacted. Please reverse this change so that every citizen can review council performance. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And obviously, we'll address those points as we move through the agenda. Okay. Next then, could I see Gwen Swinburne to join us?
Thank you, Chair. For the new members, I need to first emphasise that this is both an audit and governance committee, with governance the responsibility of your statutory monitoring officer. Unsurprisingly, given last year's well-publicised governance failures, there are plenty more here. Here is just a sample of the more visible, very recent blunders: the unlawful holding of the annual meeting, the fact that this council had no leader for 3 weeks, and of course, the unconstitutional budget amendment slipped deep into the full council agenda before you tomorrow. And now for the less visible. First, you have before you the draft annual accounts. An essential element of those accounts is the very boringly entitled annual governance statement. This has to be published in draft as part of the annual accounts and be subject, as made clear by the National Audit Office, to the now nearly completed statutory accounts inspection process. The AGS is there to give assurance that the council's business is properly managed according to the law and constitution, but it isn't in your papers or anywhere. We consequently are not able to complete the statutory accounts inspection process and are being denied our rights. Second, the last few years we have had between 7 and 11 audit and governance committees a year, but this year the monitoring officer has programmed only 4. Considering the constant visible and hidden democratic governance failures, the promised peer review, the major regional governance changes ahead, as well as the desperately needed community governance review, he should have programmed 8 committees just as a baseline. Thirdly, given even these few issues, you might be surprised to read in the monitoring officer's self-report that he has, as previously, nothing significant to report. One wonders what he considers significant. He is, however, are we okay, Chair? May I continue?
Yeah, if you could not refer to an individual member of the council
Statutory
authority.
officer, monitoring officer reporting to the committee. It's not a personal comment, it's about the work he does.
Okay.
He is, may I continue, Chair?
Okay.
Thank you. He is, however, writing a cultural change programme to improve member-officer relations. Once again, only you appear to be targeted for behaviour change and training, and are silent on how officers are to behave towards you. May I propose that you require that the promised report in September.
30 seconds.
Yes, I'm well on the way, Chair. May I propose you require that the promised report in September addresses both officers' behaviour and attitudes, as well as those of members. Finally, Chair, when are we about to get our second independent person? Members have repeatedly asked for this and been denied. With all these new members, the appropriate checks and balances are absent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We can move on then to Mr. Jeff Beacon. I think there's a red. Yeah, it's on. So make a start in your own time, please.
Does that get in the way? Where's the?
It does
Can you
if
hear me
you.
now?
I think it'll block it on the.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Ready now? Okay. I'm here to ask for help to resolve a problem with procedures on evidence of mine that was rejected at the local plan inquiry. I want to know if they were correct and whether York Council had an effect on them. About the time for submissions, I was writing to the council about the York Central development and trying to get meetings with council officers. I was distracted, so I missed the correct date. Later in July 2018, I sent in a late submission, got a refusal. Out of fairness to all, within an hour, and my document exiling the poor was returned. Thought the response was a bit quick, So I asked the planning inspector what information they had on me. They had none. I thought that a bit strange, given that I've been refused. In July 2019, there seemed to be another chance to get a submission. So I sent a Exiling the Poor document in and a climate change one. These were accepted, but later cancelled. Well, later Exiling the Poor was rejected. In 2019, I actually got onto the table to speak at the inquiry, and I was asked to see the programme officer in the morning after complaining about Exiling the Poor being deleted. And I was told that the rejection had been done by an email that named me. During the lunch hour later, I was approached by, I think it was Mike Slater from York Council, the programme officer and Inspector McCormack, and told I could not speak. I'd been ready to speak, had my thing on the end saying I'm next, but they stopped me. You can see me saying I've been banned on the video. In December 2019, I found out later there was a correspondence trail with the insert rejection, refusal by phone added to it.
It's 30 seconds, thank you.
And you can't FOI a phone call. In April 2020, I got a reply from the planning inspector, no recorded note, not obliged to ask Inspector Barclay for his recollections. And I mean, the important bit here isn't all these bits. It's that York is even more exiling the poor as the number of housing that must be built
That's your time.
has got to be greater.
Okay.
Because we've got as the MP says, we've got lots and lots of Airbnb.
I'm going to have to stop you there.
And climate change is much, much worse this month than it was last month.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me get away with it, Chair.
And then if you could move on to the next item, which is it's item 2. So it's considering the exclusion of the press and public from the meeting. I think it's item 11, isn't it? And it's the exempt annexes at the back of that. Obviously, one of the public speakers have raised some concerns about that. And I think in general, in the past, we have generally received these items in its entirety and publicly. I guess if you could just say a bit about why perhaps a change in approach, has happened and what specifically, I guess, about these items leads you to believe that they should be withheld from the public.
Happy to help, Chair. So the gentleman is correct that this provision has been in place in the Local Government Act 1972 for a fair number of years now, and it explicitly includes the business dealings of a person, including the authority. So there is a very explicit understanding that the authority is entitled to exempt some of its business information from the public realm. Now, internal audit reports are there essentially to provide a degree of comfort to the Section 151 officer to demonstrate that procedures are being followed, and where they're not being followed, then there is an action plan for how to remedy those. By definition, therefore, they rely on officers and those who are interviewed being candid about what issues they may see. There is a very significant risk that in putting all of this information into the public domain, people are less candid than they would otherwise be, because that opens them to public criticism. This is not to prevent the committee itself from scrutinising it, and that is the purpose of this committee. But obviously, it's a bit like posting on Facebook that you're going away on holiday for the next month and then being surprised when you come home and find that somebody's burgled you. Now, Councillor Fisher will remember that we did this at the last meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee, and we explicitly exempted those items, because it is for this committee to consider and satisfy itself that there are processes in place. But at the same time, the purpose of those reports is to provide confidence to the Section 151 officer and to you. But there is an inherent danger. I think it's fair to say, and my colleagues from Veritao will doubtless be able to confirm, but York is almost unique in having published any of these. It is not a common practice anywhere across the country. And certainly the authorities that I've served in the past, likewise, exempt all of this information from the public domain.
This is more about bringing us into line, I guess, with other authorities and what you'd expect.
It's the normal practice across the country. I don't know whether my colleagues from Veritao or whether Debbie wants to step in and say anything.
Briefly, if you do.
Well, briefly, Bryn is correct in saying that the vast majority of other local authorities do not publish full audit reports as part of audit committee agendas. York is pretty much alone in doing that.
Councillor Healy?
Thank you, Chair. Is my understanding
Mike.
correct that around 20...
Okay, press the little button. Is my understanding correct that around 2016, a decision was made to publish more of these and if necessary, apply redactions, not withhold the entire document? If that is the case, what's changed? Well, very recently, where they're now all being excluded in their entirety.
I can't speak to what happened in 2016. I think there are others around the table who've probably been here a lot longer than I have. What has changed is that, you know, we had this conversation with the previous incarnation of the Audit and Governance Committee and started to explain the dangers of not exempting all of your audit reports, because it rather defeats the purpose of an audit report. I don't know whether, as I say, Debbie may know the history of this far more than I do, and likewise, Max or anyone else may provide some clarity. But certainly, from my perspective as your monitoring officer, this is an extremely unusual practice, to say the least, and does not do you as a committee any favours. You still get to see all the information, but as I say, it's very much ensuring that you have the handle on it, rather than leaving the stable door open once, allowing the horse to bolt.
Councillor Melly, and then.
Thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to clarify, local authorities that don't exclude press and public from considerations of these reports, do they do that because they don't feel that they're exempt, you know, under the Local Government Act, or do they feel that it is exempt but choose to not use that exemption?
Well, to summarise, practice varies across the country. Many audit committees will only receive a summary report. Some audit committees will receive the full audit report, but where those full audit reports are presented, they are generally done as a private item.
Okay. Mr. Lee?
If I can offer my sixpenneth as being either an officer or a member of the body, but having sat on audit committees and public authorities and not public authorities in other places, if you're being told that it is good practices, and this is a strategic body, not to share certain information, that you have to see more generally that it is confidential information, and you're being told that that is generally the policy in similar organizations throughout the country, there is a volume of evidence there which suggests you shouldn't be sharing everything in detail. Max made a secondary point which suggests, would it be appropriate to produce a summarized document which discusses key internal audit issues in the public domain, so that there isn't a suggestion that all audit information is confidential and not to be shared, but you change it to being strategically, here are some key issues coming from internal audit reports which the public should be being made aware of. And then you have a balance issue where if the public are made aware of certain issues, and down the track some other issues come up, which others argue they should have been made aware of. It may be that the strategic document, the overarching document is being too narrowly drawn. I'm not saying it would be. What I am saying is you can modify a document in practice, having been advised you shouldn't show the whole of every individual internal audit report to everyone who wants to look at it. In other places, there would be no, in other non-local authority, public authorities, there would be no internal audit information externally available. Local authorities are in a slightly different position with the responsibility of reporting to the public, and you're being advised by your monitoring officer that this is representative of how the vast majority of local government does it. And I think it's being suggested that the way it's been done before, without going into detail, and I don't want to know the detail, has not worked as well as it might do. And with the new monitoring officer, there are a number of suggestions being made as to how to change the way in which certain aspects of governance work.
Okay, thank you. Any further points? Or, okay, I think we've got the advice of them. Sorry, Councillor Rose.
Yeah, sorry, it's a bit of a last minute additional comment, but I guess my concern on this around the reduction in transparency, and I understand the arguments about why that is for the benefit of the council and our services. I guess my concern is there's little in the way of numerical evidence on the total number of councils that do things one way or another, the impact on those councils of whether it is better or worse. And I wonder if there is some evidence out there, whether it's worth bringing to a future meeting to demonstrate that it is an increasing trend, that since 1972, things are more frequently becoming closed door, if there are risks associated with the council that haven't done it that way, I guess.
So I'm not aware of any body of evidence. I don't think it's the sort of thing that councils actually collect. Certainly I can speak to the authorities that I've served at, and obviously I have links with probably a dozen or more other authorities, and York is unique in that. Max will probably have a better scope of evidence because you serve a number of authorities. But
Okay, I mean, I understand there's probably 2 or 3 other councils where the full audit reports are presented. Having said that, we've never done a proper sort of piece of work to identify practice across all local authorities. I just know that when I talk to my counterparts elsewhere, most of them are generally surprised at how much information is made public at York, and they do. I mean, the issue as Burns set out is that by making it public, it actually makes our work as internal auditors more difficult, because we inevitably, if we identify issues, there's often a lot of reluctance to accept those issues. We tend to get into this sort of backwards and forwards discussion about wording in the audit report, when most of that's the critical thing, is that we identify issues and they're dealt with, but by making it all very public, it makes it more difficult.
Okay, Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. No, I just want to say that I'm not too concerned about what other local authorities do. We as a committee, I think it's right that the default is that meetings are in public and there's public interest in things being published publicly and considered by the committee publicly. We as a committee need to decide whether the interests of exclusion press and public for this particular agenda item outweighs the public interest in it being done publicly. And I'm not sure that what other local authorities do is entirely relevant. I'm happy with the advice we've been given by the monitoring officer about why it's important for us and our local authority and this committee to exclude press and public from that agenda item. So I'm happy with that without worrying too much about other local authorities.
Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. The report that a monitoring officer referred to in the last cycle that was held under exempt was about the security of the building. This is absolutely critical that that does not get into the public domain. There are clearly many of these audit reports, in fact, all of them come under private and confidential when they're sent to us as emails. And, we have to be very, very careful not to allow them to be circulated or forwarded anywhere. They shouldn't be. There may be some that we take a discretionary approach on. There may be some that are probably less sensitive, which we could release to the public, but certainly we must protect the integrity and security of the council and the council systems at all costs. So I'm not saying there should be a blanket approach that we put all under exempt information. There may be some that are possible to be published, but we must be incredibly careful to protect this council.
Okay, thank you. I think there are two separate but obviously related issues, which are the case of these particular reports and whether we exclude them, and then perhaps also a separate issue in terms of what our overall approach to these should be. And perhaps what I'm hearing is that we're relatively happy with these items being excluded as they are, but it might be useful perhaps as part of the monitoring officer's next report to the committee to just outline a bit more about how we've come to this position and what the overall position is, and we can probably have a more rounded discussion about what the committee's view is at that point, rather than necessarily trying to do it in a sort of before with the main agenda item tagged on to some specific reports.
Happy to facilitate that, Chair.
Okay. So are we generally happy as a committee to accept that recommendation? Seeing nods. Okay. We move on then to item 3, which is the minutes. I think only Councillor Fisher was here, so.
I can confirm the only person who was present at the meeting was Mazars.
Okay, we're generally happy to pass them as a true record. I'm sure we'll watch the meeting on YouTube. So, okay. Now you want me to sign? Okay, so we've done public participation. If we can move on then to the first substantive item, which is the corporate governance report. And I think it's Lorraine Lunton. I'm sorry, it's the wrong way around for me. If you could just, this goes for all officers, if you could introduce yourselves and your title when you first speak, that's be really helpful. Thank you.
Good evening, committee. Nice to meet you all for the first time. My name is Lorraine Lunt. I'm the council's data protection officer, information governance and feedback team manager. It also incorporates records management, covert surveillance and complaints and feedback. So the report that I'm bringing to committee tonight covers an update on what we call the performance indicators across the service areas that my team manages and monitors, and the Information Commissioner's Office. Again, if there's any jargon that I slip into, please feel free to stop me and ask me to explain it, because there is a lot of jargon in data protection and complaints. Information Commissioner's Office published decision notices from the period of time since the last report to this committee. The different ombudsman cases, so covering the council, and we have the local government and social care ombudsman, shortened to LGSCO, and there's also the housing ombudsman services. We also have an update on the LGSCO annual letter and performance for you, and also just a brief outline of the training that's going to be ahead of the next committee in September covering covert surveillance. So moving on to the performance indicators update. First of all, my apologies that Annex 1 has no figures in the tables. I chose to keep the indicator list in so that as a new set of members on this committee, you could see the indicators that we routinely report to committee and on the York Open Data platform. This is to give you an idea and to suggest any comments, feedback, etc. that you want or may consider afterwards wanting adding into that. The figures for Q1 will be available, and I will send them round either via Democratic Services and or by email to yourselves, and also it will be publicly available on York Open Data by the end of July. It's just the way the timing fell for being able to publish this report and the figures being available for that full quarter. So moving on to the next item, which is going through some of the information about complaints. So we cover all what's called corporate complaints. We sometimes shorten that to the 4 Cs. That's because it's complaints, compliments, comments and concerns. We also manage and monitor and support and investigate complaints made through the adult social care legislation process and also the children's social care legislation process. So the first table at number 2.3 gives you, going back 3 Q1 periods, the number of corporate complaints. So that's anything that is in adults or children's social care, mist bins, street lights, etc., and that doesn't have another appeal or legal process for somebody to raise an expression of dissatisfaction. So as you will see, we are slowly making an improvement in the in time. So we're up at nearly 97% of corporate complaints being responded to the customer in time. That's a significant improvement since 2021. You will also notice that there has been a drop in the figures of complaints received in this quarter compared to last year, but it's more or less fallen back to the same in the year before. It may be due to a number of factors. People got more able to raise complaints, etc., through the 4Cs process and the way that we changed the recording and the assessment of corporate complaints. So it moved from a hierarchical 3-stage process to an assessment of complexity and requirements and to a 2-level graded process. Complaints regarding children's and adult social care complaints are shown in the boxes at 2.5, and that again shows that all I was able to pull out and be able to put in place for today's publication date was the number that we've received in those time periods in Q1 and how many are in progress and are completed in that time scale. Moving on to the Freedom of Information requests and Environmental Information Regulation requests, told you, FOI and EIR. Again, we've shown the figures of in-time and out-of-time performance and the number of those types of requests for information received in the same Q1 period going back 2 years. As you can see, we are slowly again making an improvement on the in-time performance for FOIs. We consistently maintain quite a high percentage of responses in time for EIRs, so your environmental information regulations, and we are making real improvements in the timeliness of responses to what's called subject access requests to records. Those are often complex. If somebody wants the access and copy of all the records that the council may hold on them, these can go back decades. So it is a time-consuming and sometimes complex process to respond to those, but we are making improvements in that time. We're also showing that there was a dip in the performance in time in this Q1, hopefully, and with the support and guidance that we provide across the council to service areas and producing the responses, we should see that improve over the next 3 reporting cycles. We think it may have been more due to the availability of senior officers, etc., to retrieve and search through the information that we might have held due to both PERDA, but also availability by doing some election duties or pre-election duties. But we will keep an eye on it and obviously continue to report to yourselves. Going on to the ICO published decision notices. So the Information Commissioner Office will, when they receive a complaint or an expression of dissatisfaction from an individual who's requested information from the council, either under FOI, EIR, or one of the other routes for requests for information or transparency, and or a data protection request rights of individuals, they can take on that investigation and they will raise a case and liaise and work with the council to look at what did we provide, what was our evidence, etc., and then come to a decision or a determination on whether we were correct and or whether there was something else that we should have done and done better and or release more information. So in this reporting period since the last report to committee, we have had 1 published decision notice, and in that the ICO determined that there was no further action for the council to take from their investigation, and that we had correctly applied the relevant exemption, i.e. the reason why we withheld the information, and we didn't require any further steps. Just on FOIs and EIRs, the ICO's office does have a FOI group policy manager, if I've got his job title the right way around, and he has started in the last year and a half meeting regularly with colleagues like myself across all the local authorities that the ICO looks after or investigates. We had our discussion recently with them, and we went through where on the ICO's FOIs caseload, etc. that we are, and what he reported, and is happy for me to report in a public document, is that the ICO did receive 21 cases in regards to the City of York Council in their reporting period for 2022-23. Moving on to the other regulator that covering complaints, so the LGSCO and the HOS. We've had 10 ombudsman decisions since the last report, 1 from the Housing Ombudsman and 9 from the LGSCO. Of the 10 cases, 5 were closed after initial inquiries. 1 was closed out of jurisdiction of the LGSCO as the complainant was late in raising that to them. 1 was closed because it was premature, and 2 were upheld. The 2 that were upheld, there was fault and injustice found, and 1 as maladministration with recommendations and remedies for the complainant. Those decisions, summaries, actions, recommendations and remedies are shown in Annex 3, along with dates and when we've completed those actions, whether they were in time or out of time, and if they are all done in full. The LGSCO will be publishing their annual performance and annual letter by the 26th of July, which is next week. That is all the local authorities' information on their cases that have been raised to them, their investigations, their findings, and they do an interactive online map where you can match your local authority next to similar or your neighbouring local authorities. So the next report to committee will make reference to that, but again, when that is published on the LGSCO's website, I can send that link round with the updated figures for Annex 1 as well. And finally, just to entice you, enthuse you for September committee meeting, we will be providing all committee, I think it's just before committee starts, I think planned for about 4:30, training in what's called covert surveillance and your obligations and your understanding of what that means, so that you can provide that overview, oversight, management and monitoring of the council's use of covert surveillance. So again, there'll be lots of acronyms: RIPA, CHIS, covert, overt surveillance, collateral intrusion, etc. So yes, it's planned for just ahead of the September meeting. So an external company that is coming in to support myself in delivering that training. So yes, hopefully you'll enjoy that and you'll be able to look at the annual covert report as well. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, and I'll just invite questions from the committee. Just a quick one from me first. So I think it would be useful to, I think you sort of answered my question in part, which was we will in future get the sort of full range of indicators, including the past ones, because before we had sort of the three previous years as well as the previous quarters, whereas this one's just listing the first quarter of, presumably it means 23-24, but we will get all of them.
There's hundreds. You won't get all of them that's available to you on your open data platform, but what I will do is I'll pick out the relevant preceding quarters and also the ongoing quarters in this reporting year, so you'll be able to see the difference in the figures and the moving and or the themes. There are some, I've had some comments from one of the public speakers and suggestions to look at expanding out on the, where I've said number of complaints, to expand that out into directorates, so you can see that clearly in this report rather than having to go onto your open data and look for yourself. So yes, any suggestions, any feedback, anything else that you feel that you may want to see in there, I can certainly take away and consider and look at for the next committee.
Yeah, and that's what I meant, more the backwards one rather than more indicators. I think that'd be useful. And I think as well, we've never, as a committee, we've never actually had Q4 for 22-23. So if that one could be included in the next.
Sorry, my apologies. I thought I had done full year. Sorry. I will make sure that's sent round.
Yep, so if that'd be good as well. So Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. It's just something slightly strange about the Annex 3. It says on page 10, the Ombuds report, there were 10 Ombudsman decisions, and there are in fact 10 in Annex 3, but two of them are exactly the same. If you look, 23001684 is listed both on page 20 and 21. It's the third one down on page 20, and those are the same, look to be identical. Does that mean that one has been missed off and that's substituted by mistake, or were there only 9?
Switched it off rather than on, I'm sorry. My apologies. I'll take that query away and just double check whether it's a reference number issue or whether it's the details that are that have been duplicated by error.
Presumably just checking who actually reads the reports. I'm sure we all noticed that. Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the council's corporate complaints procedure, have there been any complaints of particular concern in the last quarter, or any that have had to lead to lessons being learned and changes being made? And has the procedure been effective in making sure those changes happen?
So part of the process around not just the corporate complaints, but the adults and the children's, is that we do actions and lessons learned and themes. And what we then do is meet regularly with not just the corporate directors, but down to managers and teams, where we share learning across the council teams, because sometimes something that's went wrong in one area could be, and how we've rectified that and or can reduce that happening again. We can share that with other service areas as well. There is in this current last quarter one, the range of types of complaints are no different to what we would have got the quarter before or the previous year. They range across all the different services that the council provides.
So a similar complaints being raised again, so it hasn't been prevented?
Where we can learn and reduce those complaints. So for example, if we have a run of complaints saying about missed bins, for example, we'll look at and investigate what the reason was for that missed bin and work with the head of service and the directors in that area to look at, is there a policy change? Is there a service delivery change that needs to happen to reduce that type of missed bin complaint reoccurring? So whilst there may be similar service area and complaints being raised in service areas, they should be learning, and it will be where there's a change in policy or procedure or how we deliver things is coming from the lessons learned. What I could do is also look at sharing themes and lessons learned as part of the report to committee rather than just figures.
Yep.
I sort of dropped an email in about an area which does have numbers on it, which is to do with adult and children's social care. And I mean, if there's a delay in bin collection and you're getting a lot of complaints about it, that's one thing. But on the data here, 2.5 and 2.6, it's suggesting that there's been a lack of completion in relation to complaints within the time. And the problem with social care is they are bad for the organisation's reputation if you don't get them right, but they can also be extremely bad for the individual. Now, it's not possible to tell from this whether these are serious issues that are delayed, but it is suggesting that there are issues that are delayed. So in data presentation, it's helpful if one knows which are key strategic problem issues in terms of risk to humans or risks to the organization, as opposed to it's really annoying I didn't get my bin emptied. And I would suggest that the data on here, which suggests there's been an increase in the number that have not been completed on both of those areas, which in the current quarter, adding the two together, is 10. And in the previous 2 years, in the equivalent quarter, it was a total of 1. Now, should that flag up to the committee, there's potentially a serious issue here, because one doesn't actually know what the complaints are about, and therefore how significant they are. And if you're getting, is there any responsibility for someone in the system for saying there are complaints arriving at the audit committee which haven't been dealt with? Some of these are serious, and here's the ones that are serious.
So firstly, I'd just like to say thank you very much for the question. I've looked into these figures, obviously, from the queries, and it is, and I will hold my hands up, I could have and should have explained these slightly better. Yes, there are a number of complaints still in progress, but that's for a number of reasons. It's not a delay. It can be down to where in the quarter the complaint was sent into us. So, for example, in adults and children's social care complaints, there can be up to 60 days to investigate and respond to a complaint in full. So whilst absolutely I agree, we have to highlight to yourselves where there's significant risks and issues coming through from adults and children's social care complaints, to yourselves and obviously up to corporate directors and etc. However, for these ones, it's a mixture of they're in progress, they're still potentially in time or will be in time. It's just the dates that they may have been received, the complexity of the investigation and or the complaint, the requirements and needs of the customer and the complainant. So, for example, if it's a stage 3 complaint and we need to do an independent person and an independent investigator and set up a panel, there will be times and days to set those up, etc. The other thing is that there is accountability in the system that the council manages and monitors complaints through, and that includes those regular meetings with the corporate director and managers in adult social care. And that helps us to identify and manage any of those internal factors or risk areas that are impacting on complaints and any delays in responses and investigating them in full. And then we will provide at those points the additional targeted support and guidance when those are identified. So absolutely, I take on board that I should have explained those headers better, and we'll do so if we use those tables going forward, and also provide any other responses to your queries.
Thank you. I think you've
Can
got
I
a follow-up.
just follow up on it, which is, this is a number-based committee, and the numbers say in 2 years in the equivalent quarters, there was a total of 1. And in this year, in the equivalent quarter, there are 10. Now, I can 11, in fact, sorry. I can accept your explanation as to how you handle them, and there are a number of variables in how you handle them. But I'm saying there's a very big variable between this year on both adult and children's compared to the previous 2 years. I'm not expecting you to provide an answer. How could you necessarily? But I would say that even on quite small numbers, that's quite a significant difference, because in every year you'd expect delays, you'd expect 60 days to do responding and so on. But it looks to me from the outside quite a big difference, and it is an area of more concern than some other areas would be. So it's an assurance that the committee needs that there are not issues, underlying issues there which could be problematic for the organisation. Your description of how the system works is a reassurance. We do all of these things, but it's not a certainty that the numbers there are not hiding potentially a problem.
Okay, I think I've got Councillor Healy, Councillor Fisher and Councillor Rose. Is this the same?
Yeah, same point.
Sorry. Could I suggest that Lauren's given an opportunity to go back to the relevant directorate, bottom these out with that relevant person, bring it back to the committee in September with the relevant person, and you consider excluding the press and public from it, as it's obviously complaints where you may identify individuals, because it is, those variants are just too large.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the alternative is to email the committee if you get a response, and then come back as you would do in November, or just trying to not pad the committee too much in September as well. If we actually get an answer that can be shared by email and then follow it up later.
What I can do and take away and respond back through email to committee members is a breakdown of why these 6 and 4 are in progress at this point in the reporting cycle. Bearing in mind the numbers received are fairly constant, robust, but I will take away and look at the 6 and the 4 being still in progress at this point in the reporting cycle and give an update.
You're happy with that as an approach?
I'm not going to be here, so I'm going to be a sub. The only reason I did suggest you bring back the directorate and you do it here is you have an opportunity to go backwards and forwards and spark questions off each other. So that's personal preference, but it's your committee, but your regular.
Perhaps if we see the response we get and then take it from there, I can always bring you back in having seen the response, I guess. Councillor Fisher?
I think the reason for that may be very simple. There's been a year to finish all the 2022 ones, and they've been dealt with in the intervening time. At no point does it say here that the April to June 2022 ones were dealt with by the end of 2022, but they are now complete. And I think that may be where the problem is. Some of them are still ongoing because they require further investigation. The ones that were submitted in previous years have all now been dealt with because they're a year old. I think that's probably where the problem arises.
Okay, Councillor Rhodes?
Yeah, that's just a, I guess. Yeah, that's my exact understanding as well, which is that 2 weeks after the end of June, we've got a few outstanding from June. Not surprising if it's 60 days for certain circumstances. There's one on here that's still in progress from 2 years ago. But if we look back at this time last year or the year before, there would have been outstanding ones from their respective quarters. I guess, can you confirm that that is a correct understanding? And the specific one that's 2 years old, is there anything to note about why that's longer than 30 to 60 days?
What I'll say is, again, it comes down to trying to provide some information to committee in the absence of the full quarter figures being validated. And I would highly expect that one still showing in progress was that it was one in progress at that reporting time and not still in progress. So I will certainly go back and check that one and confirm to yourselves that it isn't still in progress.
It'd be good to confirm either way, because for me, it looks like either we've gone from 0 to 10, which is a big leap, or we've got one outstanding for 2 years, which is of note.
Yeah, no,
so
sorry.
In either instance, it'd be good to get the clarity. But yeah,
sorry.
Thank you.
You're not comparing.
Sorry, Mike.
We're not comparing a quarter with a quarter, i.e. at the end of the quarter in 2021, there were this number. The end of the quarter in 2022, there were this number. And the end of the quarter of 2023, there were this number. We're looking at the cumulative effect of things that happened in 21, 22 and 23. So you're not able to tell whether there are more outstanding at the end of the first quarter in 23 than there were at the end of the first quarter in 22, or there were in the first quarter of 21, which would be a comparative table. You're simply being told the snapshot of the current position is, and that's not very useful information in a sense, because when I look at it in this form, and I think I've been told something similar before and I'd forgotten it, when I look at it in this form, I worry that there are a lot of numbers outstanding in an area which is highly sensitive. But what I'm actually now hearing is the only interesting thing on the table is something hasn't been resolved for 2 years.
Okay, well, we'll find out from the,
these tables are not what you would usually see because they are just indicative figures, not indicative figures, they are figures that I wanted to put in so that you had some indication of the number of complaints in the different areas in this reporting quarter. If you look at the full list of performance indicators at Annex 1, you will see that there is different information around adults and children's social care complaints, including numbers of received, the assessed level, the numbers of upheld in full, responded to in time. There's lots of information on that list that isn't these figures and gives you a much more wider picture of the adults and social care complaints that we're receiving and being dealt with. I do apologise that these tables that I've put in as a one-off have caused any confusion and any concern. However, I will respond to the queries that have been raised on these two tables and confirm the answers to them via to committee.
Okay, any further questions at this point? Councillor Burton?
Very rookie question. Is there an audit done by Verita of the complaints, or are they audited at all, or is it just internal from your department?
The service areas that corporate governance team have completes a number of internal audits every year by Verita. I'm just trying to remember, we've done a complaints one in March 2023, and that report coming. Yeah, I have 5 underway at the minute, and there was one done recently on the complaints process, and that was because we introduced and changed the corporate complaints process a couple of years ago as well. So yes, there has been an internal audit and oversight, and it is an area that comes back quite frequently as well.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions from the committee? Councillor Rose?
Yeah, sorry, just because it suddenly occurred to me, obviously we're only seeing the one quarter, Q1 of the 3 years. So if we've got one in Q1 2021, we might have others in the other 3 quarters of those 2 respective years. If you could include that data when you're circulating, that'd be great, thanks.
I certainly will, yeah. And I'll also make sure that the information and give you the direct links into the York Open data where there's the adults and children's social care complaints going back years. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Just then, what I hope is probably a quick question. Just on the FOI table, so we've got it split between in time and out of time, and I think is the in time within the sort of 20-day limit, or is it 20 days plus if they're allowed an extension for whatever reason?
So the FOI and the EIR timescale is as soon as possible, but up to 20 working days. So the in-time figures shown there are how many of the responses or the percentage of responses that are done within that maximum of 20 working days for both FOI and EIRs. SARs, so your subject access requests to records, are slightly different. That is 1 month, 1 calendar month for most subject access requests. However, in that we can have up to a further 2 months to respond and filter a SAR, and that's usually based on the complexity, the number of files and records and systems that we have to search through and retrieve and go through to be able to provide the full response.
Okay, and just on that point then, so obviously there's 2 elements to the sort of responsibility, which is promptly and not later than 20 days. Presumably measuring whether something's done promptly is difficult, more difficult than measuring whether something's done within 20 days. But I guess all we get is that it was done within 20 days. Is there a way of giving an idea of how many were actually completed, within a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? You get an idea of whether they're all just actually bunching up at the 20-day point when somebody goes, oh, crikey, we need to do this by tomorrow, or whether there is actually that effort to do it as quickly as possible.
Absolutely, there is, and the guidance and support we provide to service areas is that as soon as possible, but no later than. And we have different internal timescales and reminders and chases to service areas to provide their responses. So it would be at 10 days and 15 days. One of the public speakers has also suggested breaking down the in-time responses to different time slots. The difficulty with that at the moment, providing it in this form, is that my current case management system, it would be a lot of manual manipulation and pulling that information out from date received, date responded. We would have to do a manual count. It is doable, and it is in for the upgrade of my case management system that we use in the team that we're hoping to go live with on the 1st of October. So starting to report from Q3, we'll be able to show that breakdown of how many within 5, 10, 15, maximum 20 days. So that will be coming soon.
Okay, that'd be useful. And then just finally, then is there a way of breaking it down by department, service area?
So
Just to see
again,
if there's any that are particularly slow.
so again, you should be able to see more detailed information on York Open Data, but I appreciate you want to be able to see that in the report that comes to committee. Again, it was another comment and feedback from one of the speakers tonight on the same thing. And I have said that I will take that away and look at it and see if it's possible and how quickly I can get that into the next reporting cycle for you.
That's great, thank you. Any further questions, Councillor Rose?
Just a follow-up question on that, which I was going to ask, was if it's no later than, and the numbers are 75%, what's the acceptability on that? What I know we would always strive to 100%, but what would be reasonably considered green, amber, red, or a way of identifying how these perform against other organisations that are similar, etc.?
So that is something that the ICO manager monitors as well and asks us to comment on. We do continue to chase and remind and work with service areas where responses have gone out of time. So part of what the new the way we are hopefully building the system will allow us to do, and at 25, 30, 35, 40. Like most local authorities, including the ICO, they have some requests for information that have no responses and or still waiting on responses at least up to a year later. What I can say to committee is that we do a automatic generated report that is sent round all corporate directors and directors every 2 weeks that shows their FOIs, who they sit with in their teams and where they are still in time and or out of time. They never drop off that fortnightly report and chase until they're actually responded to.
Okay, thank you. And thank you very much for your report and for speaking to us this evening. So thank you. And then if we can move on then to item 6, which is the statement of accounts. I think this is Debbie Mitchell.
Yeah. Hi everyone. My name is Debbie Mitchell. I'm the council's Chief Finance Officer. Unfortunately, Emma Audrey, who I think most of you met on Friday to do some training, is unwell today and is unable to attend this meeting or even dial in. So I know you've had some training. I will do my best to answer any questions, but it may be I might need to take them away and respond by email or include them in the minutes or something next time, because like I say, Emma is our expert. It's Emma that's led on this and put the accounts together. So I would just say that they are draft and they are currently open for inspection. So we have members of the public asking us questions and inspecting the accounts. Mazars are coming on later with an update report. They will give you a bit more detail as to when they're going to start their audit work. So once they've completed their audit work, we'll come back with a final version, and that will include the annual governance statement as well in the final version of the accounts. That should come to you later in this year. I think the deadline is 30th of September. We haven't met that deadline, certainly for the last couple of years. So it might run into October, November, depending on audit capacity. So I'll leave it there if that's all right, Chair.
Okay, then if I could ask if the committee have any questions, and I think if we focus any initial questions on the narrative part of the report and then move on to the detailed numbers after. And if members, if you're referring to a page number, if you could use the numbers at the top of the page, so there's two different sets of numbers. So if there are any questions on the narrative part of the report, Councillor Healy.
I don't have many yellow tabs, so it shouldn't take long. Okay, page 37, paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that starts in shaping the budget. Second to last sentence, in relation to council tax, the 2023 budget included the council tax increase of 1.99% plus an additional increase of 1% in line with the government's adult social care precept. Is that correct?
Yes,
So council tax last year went up by 1.99%.
plus 1% in line with the adult social care precept to make a total of 2.99%. I can refer you to the executive budget report. I can send that round if you'd like to read that.
I thought it was 2.99% and
I
1.9.
think as a council official might have just whispered in your ear.
That
That was the
Okay,
current,
cool.
the current year's.
Well, that
budget.
was quick then. I know. Page 43. Treasury management, the little table of debt. Less loans matured in a year. 2022 it was 7 million. This year it's dropped to 4.7. Traditionally isn't always about 7. Why the drop?
No, not at all. It just depends when the loans were taken out. So loans can be taken out at any time. They can be for 5 years, 12 years, 15 years, 20 years. And it just depends when they mature. It's based on when they were taken out originally, which is based on when we require the money.
Okay. I always thought I've always been told it's 7 million. Okay. Okay, I don't want to do that one. Page 45, paragraph 3. You bought 8 properties for council central attracting funds part of the demolition matched by 2 million, which cost 1.9 million and 2.1 million. So that's 4 million. So they're all roughly 500,000 each. Just doing a simple division.
Not necessarily. Could be different values. Depends what sort of properties there were. I think these were for the shared ownership programme. So it's a range of properties depending on what the needs are. I can get a list. We'll have a list of what properties we've bought for how much. Not a problem. But yeah, it's a range of different properties across the city.
Okay, it's just like that's quite a lot. Okay, cool. Moving on. Do you just want the narrative report? Yeah.
Yeah. Start with that.
When does that finish? That's it. That's all I got on the narrative report.
Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. I'll refer you to also to page 37. Sorry. I'll refer to page 37 as well, which is paragraph 4, which is interest rates increased throughout 2022-23, starting at 0.75%, finishing the year at 4.2%. And it now says interest rates are continuing to rise. Now, clearly that will have an impact on our borrowing. Now, later on in the report, in the Treasury management report, much further on, you show a graph of how the amount of repayments relates to our gross income. Has that particular document been taken into account, the potential further rise in interest rates, or is it set on the interest rates that we've got set at the end of the year?
Sorry, are you asking about the Treasury management report?
It's linking the comments in the narrative report to a further thing in the Treasury management report, page 197.
The statement of accounts are very much at a point in time, which is 31st of March 2023. So this was as at the time of writing, May 2023, and a statement of accounts, as you probably heard in training, are a backward-looking document. What has happened and how we report that in line with the accounting code of practice and the regulations. But the Treasury management report is a little bit later and tries, although it is out of date. I mean, as soon as it's published, really, things are out of date at the moment, aren't they? But the Treasury management report tries to take more of a forward-looking approach. So they are slightly different things, but we've tried to take everything into account as far as we can and link as much as we can.
Okay, any further questions?
don't particularly want to ask you a question, I'll just make a comment around it, which is, I dropped a note about a couple of issues in the document. As it's in a draft stage here, it's probably helpful when drafts come around, if members of the committee can maybe raise their queries in advance, particularly got a lot, because they get a second go when the final version turns up, if there's still issues. Otherwise, we could end up talking things through twice over as we're moving forward.
Any further questions, Councillor Rose?
Just one question of clarity, because throughout there are sometimes calendar years and sometimes financial years. I'm just trying to get my head through it. And this was at point of 31st of March 23. But in the York Outer Ring Road duelling on page 41, it mentions anticipated in early 2023. Is that early calendar year 23? And is that post March? Is that financial year 23-24? Am I misunderstanding that?
No, that's a good point, actually. And I don't know the answer to that, Councillor. So I think as we were writing this, I think we were thinking early 23-24, actually, because we were writing this in early 22-23, if that makes sense, because we were writing it in April and May. So I think that should be 23-24.
Okay.
Councillor Fisher?
The question is also on the York Outer Ring Road duelling. As I see, this is possibly slipped slightly behind schedule in terms of the planning application not having yet been decided. And also the slight worry about the acquisition of land and the possible need to go to compulsory purchase. If that happens and we do slip, there is always the risk of overspends. How would those overspends be dealt with? How would we tackle an overspend on the York Outer Ring Road? Because my residents would desperately want it, and I'm worried that could put it at risk if we can't find the funding for it.
Yeah, there would be a number of ways that we would tackle that overspend. Might be a bit difficult on this project, but generally you would try and value engineer to remove cost. You would look at where your funding was coming from. So some of this is funded from West Yorkshire Combined Authority. We would ask them potentially. I can imagine what the response might be when you go and ask for more funding, but we would ask. And I guess our other way of funding it would be to remove something else from the capital programme to fund it instead. So if we had to take on additional borrowing, I, given our current financial situation, would advise that we don't increase our costs anymore, and therefore we would look to say, what else can we not do instead in order to fund an increase in cost? So there'd be a number of different things we could do as and when it arose.
Thank you. That's a reassurance I desperately wanted.
Okay, thank you. If there are no further questions at that point, if we could move on then to the main financial statement section, which is all the tables and numbers. I guess if we start with Councillor Healy. Or if anybody else has a question whilst he flicks through. I did have a question. I also don't know where it is, but somewhere in the report it mentions Yearsley Pool, and there's a sort of fund set up a few years ago, £1.5 million from unused monies for something else that is sort of rapidly approaching being used up. What I guess would happen when that is used up? Would it need to be a way found to fund it from sort of general, or could that potentially repeat, I guess, what was done before? Or
yeah, I would imagine it'd be in the reserve somewhere. I was just trying to Yearsley Pool Reserve, maybe page 88. Was that the where we created a reserve in February 2015 over a 5-year period towards support for maintaining Yearsley Pool. Yes, you're right, that if Yearsley Pool requires that maintenance and requires that ongoing contribution from the council funds, it would be a budget decision for full council. As part of the annual budget setting, we would have to identify budget growth in order to fund those costs of Yearsley Pool. Again, yes, you could look for alternative funding sources. You could look for, again, cutting back elsewhere in the capital programme, or you could go to full, as part of the annual budget process, you would look for additional growth to fund that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Healy.
Page 96, the first table. Am I correct when it says commercial direct operating expenses arising from investment property, 19 million is a cost?
Yeah, so I think Emma's, I've got a note on this from Emma. So, that it's an accounting quirk really about how it gets reversed out. So this is because in the previous year's accounts, the Guildhall was what's called an asset under construction. And now it's a completed property, so it's moved categories. The code requires us to revalue it at the point that it moves from asset under construction to an investment property. And what happens with a fair value is, as you know, if you've ever bought a new build, as I have, is that as soon as you buy it, it's not worth what it costs to build. So the cost of building a property and the value of a property are two very different things. So in the previous year's accounts, it was the cost of building it.
Yeah.
And in this year's accounts, it is now its value as a property. I'm probably not explaining that very well, but they are two very different numbers. And so that's why it shows that, yes, there is an 18 million loss in inverted commas on the value. But the way that the code sets it out, it's not a true loss on the bottom line. So it's not a real cost to the taxpayer. It's the way that the valuation of assets in local authority works. So it gets reversed out through the capital adjustment account.
I don't really understand that, but
sorry.
Yeah. I'll take it over. Okay, so it's not a massive loss then that there's affected the council.
No, it doesn't affect the council's bottom line. What it's saying is last year it was valued based on the bricks and the labour and the materials that were being put in to do the work. And now it is a valuer saying this is what that building is worth at fair value.
So it's just a,
Could I just offer a variation on a theme, which is it was a bleeding expensive building to bring up to a modern standard. And if you went out to buy a building like that to serve your purposes, you wouldn't dream of paying what that building had cost. However, the city has no intention of ever getting rid of the building. It's a long-term asset, which whenever it had to be done, if it had to be done up again in 100 years, it would cost a great deal of money to do it up again, but it would still remain an asset to the authority. You only have an issue with capital valuations if there are things you're going to sell, really, and you're going to get, this is not a marketplace item. So the authority was willing to pay whatever it took within reason, but it doesn't mean that the value would put the same value on it as an available building for use.
okay. Thank you. Councillor Healy,
Yeah. Next one. Page 107. 22 assets held for sale. I presume that's one asset, is it? But 8259 million.
No, that'll be a range of assets held for sale.
Okay. Okay.
We have a number of properties that are being actively marketed on the open market.
Okay.
I think we've been told we'll get a list of various properties and investment properties, so that might help with that side of things. I don't know whether that would be included within the accounts, or is that just a separate?
We wouldn't include that level of detail in the accounts because we're not required to under the code, but we'll send you the working paper basically that sits behind it so you can see which properties are included in that schedule.
Okay, I don't want to ask that. Thank you. Okay, next one. Don't want to ask that one. Okay, page 145. The little table. What's a multi-asset credit that's gone from 0% to 5.3%?
I don't know. I'll have to take that one away for him.
Yeah, okay. That's fine. That's right. It was a new thing, and I don't know what it is. Yes, okay. New purchases. Page 158. Net cost of HRA services in brackets, so that's a positive balance. Page 158, about 2/3 of the way down the page.
What's the number that you're looking at? Sorry, what's the number?
Page 158.
You know, the number in the table.
Yeah.
Oh, 2140 in 2023,
The
23.
net cost, sorry, yes.
Okay, so
Yes,
That
that's a surplus, as it were. It's a
that's the surplus.
figure,
Okay, so that's the money that is available in the HRA to invest in new properties. That's your,
Not really, because then you've got all the stuff that reverses out below the line, so it's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's how the HRA account looks.
okay. As we're on the sort of HRA section, can you just explain the budget amendment that's coming forward tomorrow and how an increase in depreciation has freed up a whole bunch of capital?
Yeah, I can explain that. So under the rules for the housing revenue, I think Emma might have explained that in the general fund, depreciation is not a real charge. It doesn't hit the bottom line. It's slightly different in the housing revenue account. We used to use the major repairs allowance as a proxy for depreciation. The government changed the rules, and so that now what happens is we have to charge depreciation to the revenue account, and that what happens is that is then credited to the major repairs reserve. So what the government says is the amount that you depreciate your assets by, you need to put that in a reserve set aside for capital funds to spend on the properties to maintain it at that level. So you don't want to depreciate it to zero because, so whatever you depreciate it by, you put in a reserve to spend on capital. And so because depreciation's gone up, that's not something we control. Again, that's set under the code, how you calculate depreciation. Because depreciation has gone up, there is more money in the major repairs reserve, which means there is more money to spend on capital. And that's not a political decision. It's something that happens as part of the valuation process. It would have happened anyway. It's something that happens when things are revalued and the depreciation happens.
Okay, so where does that money come from then? Is that the decrease that we just talked about of 2.5 million in the net cost of HRA services? Is that? Well,
it comes in the expenditure line of depreciation, impairment and revaluation losses of non-current assets.
So what page is that?
That's the same page, but slightly above in the table of expenditure. So you sort of what you're essentially doing, and I'm paraphrasing this a little bit, so it's technically maybe not exactly accurate. But you're sort of moving money from revenue into capital. So you're charging revenue and saying you're not spending that on revenue, you're moving that into capital and saying this is for major repairs investment. So this is money that you have to spend on the kind of fabric of the stock and maintaining the stock. Okay, so in that case, there should be an equivalent decrease in revenue then? Well, that's what the revenue account runs at a surplus in order to repay the debt. This is a whole other topic really about the HRA and the self-financing system and the debt that we had to take on to finance the HRA. Okay, so. But yes, there is a charge into revenue. Okay, so that money that you've allocated for capital in the budget, there's an equivalent decrease in the HRA revenue. Sort of, but not exactly because of how the calculations work. Okay. I don't think I'm going to be able to explain it to you here in detail. Sorry.
All right, well, hopefully it will come.
Can I try, looking at it from not a local authority point of view, but an individual almost. If you buy a house, if you want to maintain the house at the same level, you have to put some money aside somewhere or in future borrow in order to meet the cost. If you rent a building out, then if you want a tenant to continue being willing to pay the rent on the building, you've got to use some of the rent he gives you to maintain the building. And a local authority or a housing association, which is my background, you look at what it's going to cost you to maintain your estate, and you, in your revenue income, in your rents, you're charging enough to enable you to maintain that estate in good condition, or you've got a problem, which is your estate is going to deteriorate. And the accounting treatment, God love local government accounting, and God love housing revenue account accounting within local government accounting. They are a specialist field. But if it's possible to think about it just in more simplistic terms, if you want to maintain your property, you've got to have money to meet the capital costs. And if you collect rents from people in order to do it, you've got to use some of that rent to help you maintain your capital.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand that and understood that. It's just that it looks like, well, no, I can't work out where the money's come from that you're actually going to physically spend.
as opposed to I've notionally increased the depreciation on my house.
Yeah.
So to take the example that the independent member just gave, if my house is worth £100,000 and this year I decide I'm going to replace my windows and that's going to cost me £5,000, where in here does it show that £5,000? Because in the budget amendment, it's not clear at all where the money's come from to pay for this, and it's quite a substantial sum of money as well, we're talking millions, has actually come from. So I was hoping here, which is, you know, where the finance brains sit, you could explain where that money has come from.
It's come from within the housing revenue account, and it's about the rules and regulations about how we have to move money through reserves, through the capital adjustment account and through the major repairs reserve. And it's about how much money we have to set aside for reserves and how much we're allowed to spend. I'm not going to be able to explain it to you here in detail, but I can take it away again and try and give you some more information that tries to see it through. I understand why you want to see where it comes from, but it is accounting adjustments, and it's just a way of moving the money around within the ring-fenced housing revenue account that allows us to spend more of it than we would previously been allowed to under the regulations. But that's the best I can do for you at this level. We're going to get really into the weeds here and in the nitty-gritty, and I would respectfully suggest that's probably not something we want to discuss at this committee, and maybe something I can take away and do you more detailed briefing on.
You could do, couldn't you?
Yeah, and I think that'd be helpful if you could say, I think the confusion comes because there's a balance. It appears to be balancing itself, I suppose, because there's the money in from the depreciation balanced by the spend as it looks on repairs and all the rest of it. So it looks like the sum of those two things is zero, whereas actually presumably there's another sort of number coming from somewhere. Any further questions then on the
Page, you can tell I haven't been here for 8 years, can't you? Page 167, investment properties, balance 1st of July. The figures for 2022 to 2023 are exactly the same. My understanding is most of the council's investment properties are in commercial property, and commercial property is down significantly from 2022 to 2023.
Yeah, this table summarises the movement in fair value. Again, I'll have to take that query away, councillor, because I don't have that level of technical knowledge.
No, it's fine. Okay. And that's it.
Okay, thank you very much. I can't see any further questions. But I just had one which probably should have asked in the narrative bit, but no doubt you've seen what's happened at Birmingham, where somebody sort of updated a IT sort of system and realised they owed hundreds of millions of pounds. Presumably there's no danger of that happening.
No, in a word. I'm not totally up to speed with what's been happening at Birmingham, but no, we do make proper provision for our repayment of debt and our borrowing and everything, which I think was part of the issue there. And we've been through things like equal pay, and we've done all that work, and we've had reserves set aside and we've used those reserves. So no, there isn't anything about equal pay that we need to be concerned about.
Okay, thank you. Okay, move on then to take a quick 5-minute break. We're back by 7:05, please. Ready to? Okay, thank you. Welcome back, everybody. We can move on then to item 7, which is the Treasury Management Outturn. And I think this is Debbie again.
Yeah, this is another fun. Again, what I would say on Treasury is recognise that it's another topic where we need to do some training for the committee. Apologies to Councillor Fisher, who's probably done it several times by now. But yeah, again, it is a technical subject. I'll do my best to take you through it. So the two things I would say is, one is we do need to sort some training out for the committee, but I think we prioritise the accounts because that was the bigger issue. But you will see this report sort of every quarter or so. So again, whenever it fits in with your agenda and what other training you've got to do, we'll arrange another training session beforehand to give you a bit more information. In terms of this report, the other thing I would say is ordinarily, if the schedule allows, we would try and bring the Treasury reports to you for scrutiny before they go to executive. It doesn't always quite work out. So what I would try to do, bring it to you for scrutiny. Any comments that you may have, I can then include in the executive report. Like I said, it doesn't always work out timing wise, particularly with the election and everything this year. So if the committee does have any comments they wish me to take back, I can include them in the next executive report. And the only thing I would say is that I've done a brief cover report, but then there's sort of a bit the wrong way around. So Annex A was the annex to the original executive report, and that's really what you're looking at is the original executive report that went in June. There's nothing really to draw your attention to. It's been a relatively quiet time for Treasury. We haven't undertaken any new borrowing, which would be something that you would really want to, as a committee, want to keep an eye on. Some of the high profile financial failures that have been of other councils across the country have very much related to taking on borrowing either way in excess of what they can afford, or they've taken on borrowing and they've not made a proper provision in their accounts to repay that borrowing. So there's a bit of a theme there. We've not done anything like that. We haven't undertaken a new borrowing. We manage our cash flow very carefully, and we don't do any particularly risky investments. We always borrow from the Public Works Loan Board, which is through the government, and we only ever invest in money market funds and UK banks and building societies. So it's a relatively steady kind of period. So I'll leave it there really. I'm happy to take any questions, but equally happy if you want to sit on them and deal with it at training at a future date if you're not sure.
Okay, if there are any questions at this point, Councillor Healy. Yeah.
Specifically and generally, this is so page 197 potential indicators. I noticed on my council tax report, supporting investment, that's what you put for paying down debt that goes out to every council taxpayer. Is that correct?
It's one of the things that's included in that.
In that overall category.
Yeah.
At a general point, has that gone up a lot over the last 8 years? It's just, I seem to remember about 8 years ago, it was about 8%. And I think on the last one, it was about 14.
Yeah, it has gone up a lot. We've got a fairly substantial capital programme for a council of this size, around 500, 600 million over a 5-year programme. There is also the York Central project, which is part of the 5-year programme. It does skew it a little bit because that has got 35 million of council borrowing in, but that borrowing will be repaid from EZ receipts from that area. So it is additional borrowing, but there is an income stream to repay it, which is the main thing. So, but this, the prudential indicators don't necessarily look at the income stream to repay it. They look at how much that of your budget is spent on borrowing. Okay.
What would, I think, be quite well, I'd find it useful. I don't know if the other members would. If in the narrative section of the report, you could expand on page 198, where you have your little note that in future years, some of the forecast debt will be paid by, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you just had something that sort of said, well, this is debt with, I don't know, no income supporting it. This is debt with income supporting it. Because it just looks like from the outside.
All debt has budget to repay it. We don't we don't take debt on without also included in the revenue budget the funds to repay it. So it's all funded.
I'm not saying it's not funded,
Yeah.
it's that investment property, for instance,
Yeah.
is, and York Central, another good example, you're taking on debt, but you're gaining an income stream. Whereas this building, for instance, you took on debt to buy it with no anticipation of it generating an income, for instance. So it's almost, if the income is matching your debt, that's a lot less worry than if you're just loading up on debt.
So I'll see what we can do. I think what we, yeah, so we're showing the ratio of financing cost to net revenue stream, and it's just how much of that is funded through an income stream.
Yeah, essentially, yeah, because this looks like it's going up by quite a lot. But if you come back and say, well, actually, our income is going to go up from 2% to, I don't know, 6%, you don't need to worry.
Okay, any further questions, Councillor Rose?
Yeah, I had a broader question, but I'm going to narrow it down slightly to just follow up on that one, which is across the numbers, there's an obvious notable increase in 23, 24 and a number of the different categories. Would you be able to summarise broadly what that is and how much of that fits into the categories just described, if that's okay?
Yeah, that's mainly the slippage from 22-23. So what happens is we set a 5-year programme and we start off, I guess, with a bit of an optimum bias that says, well, we're going to do this project and it's going to be in year 2 and it's going to finish by year 3, and then kind of life happens and things slip. So we might have planned to do something in 22-23, something happened and it slipped and went into 23-24. So the reason there's quite a big sort of hump, if you like, in 23-24 is it's the stuff that didn't happen in last year moving forward into the current year. What we need to get better at is profiling that a bit more accurately and evenly, because I can guarantee what will happen at the end of this financial year is we will have another hump where it moves into the next year. So that's an ongoing sort of work in progress for us to try and improve our cash flow monitoring and our capital programme profiling so that we've got a more accurate budget to monitor against. Because what we don't want is just people to not really do anything and know at the end of the year they can just slip it into next year, because then that's not really how we want to manage the budget. So it is a known issue that we're trying to improve on.
So we're looking at the fact that it's 3+ times the following year's amount. The expectation is that it probably will be a lot bigger than next year, or the expectation is that slippage will mean they'll probably half of that onwards is going to be moving into the
without looking at the detail of the capital programme, it's difficult to say, because occasionally we do, spend that because there'll be a big project completed like the Guildhall or the Stadium or something like that. And I guess when York Central happens, that will be a big, but that's been happening quite a while, hasn't it, off and on. So yeah, I suppose the other thing when you look at the 5-year programme is this is what is in the approved 5-year programme now. I would imagine over the next couple of years, when we're putting budgets together, there'll be new investment going in, and so these numbers will change every year. So it's more to give you an indication of the direction of travel and to give you the assurance that we haven't made a decision now that will cost a significant amount of money in 3 years' time and not accounted for it and not mentioned it. So it's to kind of give you that assurance that we're looking at it over a longer time period, but acknowledging that it will change. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I guess that is good news for the CFR and the debt numbers, because it looks like there's a huge leap year 1 and then it tapers off quite quickly. But in reality, it's not going to jump quite as high in year 1 because that's based on our expenditure. Thank you.
Okay, I can't see any further questions. So I think we're able to move on then to item 8. So thank you, Debbie, for those 2, obviously, and pass on a thanks as well and best wishes. So if we can move on then to the Mazars audit progress, and I believe they're able to hear me. I think they're joining from Zoom, Mr. Kirkham and...
Thank you, Chair. It's Mark Outside speaking, Senior Manager.
Thank you. And yes, if you're able to make a brief introduction to your report, and then we'll just see if there are any questions from members.
Yep, that's absolutely fine. So I don't propose to turn the pages, and we'll take the report as read. We'll highlight the key messages from section 1, which are the important messages. As highlighted in the report, we're currently finalising the 21-22 audit. Today we received our assurance from the pension fund auditor, which should enable us to finish our 21-22 audit. And once the completion stages have been done, we will be able to issue the opinion for that financial year. It's also worth pointing out that we've also started the 22-23 audit, so we are running them concurrently, and we plan to finish that audit in the October of this year, pending any events that appear to that. As you can see on page 6 of the report, we have highlighted the risks that we expect to address in our audit, and we plan to issue the audit strategy memorandum, or the audit plan as it used to be called, to the next audit committee, which will provide further details of how we will go about that year's audit. Section 2 of the report provides some links to information reports we hope you have found useful, so I don't propose to talk about it much more, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you. And I'll just ask if the committee have any questions, if they could indicate. I can't see any, so I think we're able to leave that there this evening. And thank you for your time. I appreciate that was a short item to wait on for. So thank you. Great. If we can move on then to item 9, which is the report of the monitoring officer.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me, I just need to turn my hearing aids off the coil. Otherwise I get horrible feedback. Yeah, so this is first report of this season. As I note in there, I think there are probably 4 topics to cover in terms of significant governance issues. There is nothing that I need to report to the committee. There are day-to-day matters that I deal with as part of my role, and that's what I'm paid for. But there is nothing that the committee needs to have raised with it from my perspective. I then move on. As I say, we are in the process of considering the Constitution. It is very early in that process. So what we did was about 6 months or so ago, we did a very light touch update of the Constitution with some of the small elements that I had delegated authority to change. What we're doing now is a much larger piece of work, which will look at substantial portions of the Constitution. As I say, there are some things about public participation, council procedure rules, but again, I claim no exclusivity of genius on this subject. So I would be more than delighted if any members have any suggestions as to elements of the Constitution that they would like me to take a look at. Obviously, this body will, once we get to a point of having a revised version to talk about, will then be the committee of council that considers any suggested amendments to the Constitution and gives its views, and then we will take it on from there up to full council. I think beyond that, as I say, we are looking at, if members are familiar with the LGA's report that was taken to this committee in early February of this year. It required, as point 9, I believe, of its plan, a program for relationship building, shall we call it? And I think that to reflect on things that have been said earlier, there's little point in us trying to develop a program which builds relationships between members and themselves. This must be a two-way street with officers, because I think if the member-officer relationship fractures, then the entire council becomes dysfunctional. So some of that, as you can see from paragraph 7, is talking about the culture that the council wants to see. That must be a culture of trust between members and officers. And that is a two-way street. It's no good members trusting officers if officers don't trust members. So there is very much a need to, if not repair that relationship, then strengthen it and ensure that it is healthy for the future. That will very much feed into the line that the LGA was taking Councillor Fisher was one of the councillors present at the time. I don't know whether you remember the report itself. There were some challenges identified, and I think, you know, we recognise those as valid. So if members are comfortable with this as a point by point starting point, then, as I say, I will ask the Assistant Director for Policy and Strategy to work up a full version of this, which can run alongside and part of the council's induction programme for members. And that will just be an ongoing process over the next few years. I think happy to take questions, Chair.
Okay. Are there any questions from the committee?
Could I make a comment on the question which links to the three members of the public making comments? Unless there is a system for providing them with feedback, it can be very frustrating if you're a member of the public doing something like that. But on the other hand, where members of the public actually know what it is they are going to ask a question about, in other places, it will be required that they put it in writing in advance of the meeting. And that has a secondary benefit, which is the people who are sitting around the table can actually see in total what it is, the issues that's going to be raised. And should they wish to discuss it either in public or in private afterwards, they're able to do so. Now, I accept there can be arguments about you shouldn't force people to do something, but to make it a more efficient process for the member of the public and for the committee, I think if some more could be put into writing before the meeting, and there could be a formal way of recording in the minutes some kind of feedback as a byproduct of the meeting somehow, that people said certain things, it was noted, and at a subsequent point, something was included as a feedback.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, traditionally the way we've done that, obviously their comments are summarised in the minutes, and then a member will pick up the point and ask the question, I suppose, if they think it's worth being repeated in public.
I think sometimes it's not actually an answer that members can give at the meeting. Sometimes people are raising things where it would be equally of interest to the members of the committee to hear the answer coming back as well. So if it was documented, I'm not the member of the public who's issuing things, but sometimes it would possibly be less frustrating for them if they actually definitely saw that the questions were being answered, and it might be less frustrating for members if they knew what it is that was being talked about before people opened their mouths and just started off.
Yeah, I think potentially that's something to throw in the mix for the review of the Constitution, and whether there's anything, obviously we don't allow public questions at meetings like full council that some councils do. So
Curiously, you do, Chair.
Do we?
If I to leap in, the Constitution allows that you can ask it, you can make a statement for up to 3 minutes or ask a question. And I think in some ways the Constitution has become so convoluted that actually we lose sight of some of the basic principles of what it's there to do. For anybody who wishes to have a copy, it is 760 pages long. That is not, it's supposed to be a living, evolving document. And at 760 pages, it is impossible for anyone to do a proper year-on-year review, which is what I'm supposed to do on an in-depth basis. I would do nothing else except read the Constitution, suggest changes and bring them through. I would have guessed that somewhere around half of that is about what most constitutions are. 300 to 350 pages or thereabouts. And the rest of the things that are covered in there can be policies and protocols that the council has. They still have the same effect, but they don't need to be reproduced as part of the Constitution.
And would they get an answer to that question?
So I'll bring up the relevant section of the Constitution, because rather than try and do it from memory, the public participation protocol, which is wonderfully alliterative, stays. A registered speaker may speak. Sorry, I will. Paragraph 14. Each person registered to speak is allocated a maximum time of 3 minutes, and there'll be a maximum of 10 registered speakers. Sorry, I'm trying to find the question reference. Forgive me, Chair. It's perhaps easier to go into the council procedure rules. It's a little clearer in there. Again, this is perhaps reflective of the fact that there is information in council procedure rules which is duplicated in the protocol. So, yeah, so paragraph B42 in the council procedure rules states any member of the public shall be entitled to address the council for up to 3 minutes or may ask any member of the council a question. It then goes on, any questions to council shall be put and answered without discussion, either by direct answer or on questions which could not reasonably be dealt with at the meeting by a written answer, which will be passed on to members to answer within 10 working days. So it's one of those misnomers that, you know, it's public participation is there for people to make a statement. Well, actually, it's there for people to ask a question if they choose.
Okay, but that is full council though, isn't it not?
But those rules are then devolved down, shall we say, to all committees.
Okay. Okay. Well, you learn something new every day.
Oh, no,
Councillor Healy?
I've not been here for 8 years. In the preceding 8 years, this didn't come up at all about officer member relations. What's changed to lead, which is pretty much on this, seems to be quite a big chunk of work that is necessary?
So as someone who's 9 months into their tenure here and therefore also hasn't been here for 8 years, I'm not sure I can answer that properly as to what has changed over that period of time. I think there have been a number of publicised incidents, particularly there have been 2 public interest reports, and I think perhaps that has all contributed to a breakdown in trust between the 2 sides of the equation. I can't say definitively, but obviously the Local Government Association came in on the back of the latter PIR report and looked at how all of that relationship was working and clearly felt that there was an issue that needed to be resolved.
Okay. Okay. Second question. Tomorrow, the budget amendment is an appendix to an executive report.
Yeah.
Which I've never seen before when I was a councillor and when I wasn't a councillor. Can you just and I understand tomorrow we're going to have to suspend standing orders in order to meaningfully discuss that budget amendment. Can you just explain why we're having to do this when there was a constitution that you've just explained that's 700 pages long?
I can explain the mechanism as to how we will go through that process. Certainly, whilst I think the word I would use is inelegant, it's a lawful process to follow. The council provides within its council procedure rules the ability to suspend any one of those procedure rules on a vote. And therefore that provides the ability for the council to determine how it deals with business. At the end of the day, the council is the ultimate arbiter of how it conducts its own business. So I can explain the mechanism. As for why it is being dealt with in that way, my understanding is that it was a desire to ensure that there was a degree of political vision put into the budget amendment, and therefore it was published as part of a statement from the executive member for finance. And I've truncated her title somewhat. Is it a lawful way to do things? Yes. Is it how it's been done before? As far as I understand, no, but that doesn't mean it's unlawful. As I say, my own personal description would be it's perhaps slightly inelegant. I try to find the simple solutions for things, but it is a lawful way of dealing with business.
Okay, it's strange that on a planned meeting, in order to accomplish the business of that meeting, we know beforehand we're going to have to suspend standing orders. Typically, suspending standing orders is when something is pointed out at the meeting by a member typically us honour Sandy Fraser here, who knew the Constitution probably better than any other person I've ever met. So it's typically there for unexpected things. This budget amendment has been known about, certainly you guys, since you've been elected, would have known that you were going to be moving a budget amendment. So I don't understand why we're going down a path of suspending standing orders when you could have, when there's historical precedency that has operated over many, many years, where parties, the Labour group, when they came in 2011, moved a budget amendment that was a separate item. You had a proposer and you had a seconder, which allowed you to pick up your point about the political narrative. And we were able to amend it, and we could vote on the amendments, etc., and the budget amendment essentially passed.
Yeah.
So I don't understand why advice has been given to new members, a new group coming in, that this was preferable to what had gone before.
I don't know that it has ever been expressed as, is it preferable? I think certainly from my perspective, the only conversation that I had was, is it acceptable to do it this way? And the answer is technically yes. You know, it is an acceptable way to do things. As I say, would it be the way that if I was told, write a blank, you know, here's a blank sheet of paper, write down how to do it? Is that how I would do it? Not necessarily, no. I wouldn't necessarily also agree that standing orders or the suspension of standing orders must be something that's urgent. So I'll give you an example that if you look at the way that the agenda is structured under the Constitution, there is no discretion about the order in which the items come. Again, that's quite unusual here. A lot of places have the ability to vary the order of items, because there will be times when there's business that actually you know you need to deal with first. If, for example, a request is submitted in advance to vary those items and is not acceded to, you still have the option of going down a motion without notice to vary the agenda items. Now, you would know that potentially a week ahead of time, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's an urgent, you know, it's something that only arises on the day. So there is the reason that the Constitution contains these provisions is to allow them to be used. So if the ability to suspend standing orders was limited to matters which were raised at the meeting, which the Constitution could have done, then absolutely you're in the position of, sorry, this hasn't only just come up, and therefore tough. But it's a blanket. This is a mechanism you can use. As I say, possibly inelegant, but it certainly provides a lawful way to make the decision.
Okay, so is it within the purview of this committee, being Audit and Governance Committee, to pass the committee's view up to, well, I'm not too sure who would pass it up to, yourself, maybe, I don't know, the chief operating officer, that it would be preferable that we weren't having to go for, as you say, inelegant solutions that, though legal, seem to come with a whole raft of problems?
So I'm going to slightly contradict myself here. I think in some ways this is perhaps something that should be in the Constitution that isn't, and that's a rarity in York. There is nothing in the Constitution about how budget amendments are done, which I find amazing given that it covers so much. And this is perhaps one of those circumstances where actually that should be included, because the Constitution is clear on how you do the budget, and there's a process for that, but it's entirely silent on budget amendments. Now, to be fair, generally they will only happen when you get a change of administration. So in theory, once every 4 years or thereabouts, it's possible. So, but actually, again, as part of the constitutional review, it may well be that within the council procedure rules, we add a section that talks about, for budget amendments, this is the process to follow.
Okay, you add that to your list of whatever. Yes, can you?
I take the point absolutely.
Okay, okay. The other point was, you mentioned that there's no significant governance issues arisen since the previous meeting or this committee. So that's in the last, what? Is that the last year or the last?
It's
couple of
about
months?
6 months or so since the last one of these reports came to audit and governance.
Okay, okay. My understanding is that on 2 occasions you had to cancel meetings because they hadn't been correctly advertised to the public. When was that included in a report?
So that was prior to the last report.
Yeah.
But again, I would not consider that a significant governance issue because that is it's a process that is undertaken by officers. So obviously, I don't go out and post notices myself.
Yeah.
There are people who do that. From time to time, people make mistakes. So if you think about the annual meeting this year, we have an assistant director who posted the notice and we know posted it validly. At some point between that and the day of the meeting or the day before the meeting, it would appear that somebody has gone onto the notice board to change things and moved that notice to a different location. If you look at the notice board, it has a glass front. And across the top of that is a black banner with City of York notices.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that black banner does not appear inside the notice board. So somebody has moved the notice to the top of the notice board, not realizing that about the top 4 inches is then going to be covered. It's a human error. Is it a systemic governance issue? No, it's a mistake.
But this has now happened 3 times.
Yes, absolutely. But in 3 different ways is the problem.
Okay.
And you only ever find the problems when a mistake happens.
So those 3 different errors you've now made changes, so it's not going to happen again, basically.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, okay.
So for example, one of the control measures that I've had to put in place, and I wish I hadn't, was I get a photograph of the notice board whenever the notices are posted. So I know that they've been put.
Okay, that's good. Last question. Yes.
I actually get back. The first one is, it's very difficult. It's very difficult if individual members say, I want to know a lot more about this. And so that the committee make a decision about that, because there's someone else sitting around the table. I say, fine, if you want to do something in detail that I haven't thought about, I'd like to see it in writing. So you can raise an issue for bringing up during another meeting, but it's, quite a clear constitutional issue where you're talking about how an amendment should be made to a council meeting. I think it's perfectly reasonable. You can ask for a report to be produced on that, and then people would be in a position to consider it. But it's very difficult to start a conversation about something, and certainly is it outside to the nuances, which I'm sure been exciting all of you as to how this amendment is due to be handled tomorrow. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Because what we are being told is the constitutionally valid change has been made. It may and may not be elegant, but it is you are being advised it's constitutionally valid. And at the meeting, you can kick off if you wish and complain about it. But I don't think there's much we could do about it here. But I think that raises a second issue, which would be helpful with the governance changes moving forward. If it is possible in the organisation to actually have a working party that contains members from the 2 major groups to actually sit down together with some of the leading officers to discuss how we improve the way the constitution works without turning it into this kind of meeting. You have a discussion, you then get the officers to try and draft something which reflects the discussion between you, because the local government association, we're not overly impressed in terms of a number of aspects of governance in York. And it would be nice to move from one of the ones that gets critical local government reports to ones that works with sweetness and light together, even though you disagree politically, but you do want to have systems that work efficiently. And the only way you're going to do that is by trying to work between those 2 large parties and Bryn and his staff trying to get this constitution in an effective way that you're all signed up to.
I was just going to ask if there are any more questions. You look like you're winding up.
Just 2 more, actually. When will we see the annual governance statement? Because it's not in there at the
The
moment.
AGS is currently in preparation. It's one of a number of documents that I'm working on at present. So that will be in its final form from my perspective by the end of next week.
Okay.
So at that stage, I'll be in a position to provide it across to Debbie. And then she can take it from there.
Okay, so picking up the public's point.
Yeah.
How are the public going to have time then to comment back on it by the time the consultation period is finished?
I appreciate it's difficult. I think all we can do as an authority is open a consultation window, which says you will have 10 days from publication of it to supply any comments to the authority.
Could I just come in at that point? There is plenty of time to comment on the AGS because it's when they come as a final. So we can put it on the website. If residents want to inspect the AGS, they can do so, but it's not really something to inspect because it's a statement of kind of professional opinion. You may disagree with it, but it will be the professional opinion of the statutory officers of the council in terms of the governance and the actions that we think are needed in the year ahead. So we can publish it on the website alongside the draft accounts, but it doesn't really matter in terms of the inspection regime. That closes on the 1st of August. If residents wish to make an objection to the accounts, they can do so. So I don't think it impinges too much. Our resident here may disagree with me. Yeah. So, but we can certainly look in future years. We always used to do this. We can look again at ensuring that the AGS is included in the draft accounts, but we'll need to go in and have a discussion about that. It's obviously been really challenging when they move the deadline forward from June to May. It's a real challenge for us to get. It's a real challenge for us to get the accounts done by 31st of May. We didn't manage it this year. It was the 21st of June. So it's a simple fact about resources and time in many respects, but. I think we've heard the message loud and clear, haven't we, Bryn, that members would perhaps like that to be included in the draft accounts in future, and we can certainly try and work towards that.
Thank you. Any further questions? Did you say you had two? Okay. I'll just raise the other final issue then that I think. Sorry, on the councillor.
I wasn't sure if you're directing any more questions specifically to one person or to the room. Yeah, I've got two questions. One's just a clarity on a point earlier that was raised around the reason for the programme in point 5. And I just wanted to clarify that it was because of the resolution from this meeting, 7th of February this year, that was to respond to the PIR assurance final report for the A&G committee that came off the back of the early termination of the chief executive's employment contract. And that was the chain of events that led to why this programme is in effect currently today, just because that seemed like it was an up in the air question. And the other point I just wanted to make was a guideline in terms of not a recommendation for a change to the constitution, but areas of kind of scrutiny, noting that the York Disability Rights Forum have been making some comments around systemic challenges in the organisation across the city. And also this week, we've had the Inclusive Equal Rights UK organisation making similar comments around kind of institutionalised inequalities, if you like. And I would recommend, if and where possible, that the constitution language and processes are scrutinised from that perspective. I think when you say that there are hundreds of pages of contents in there, many of which date back for a long time, that don't get the annual scrutiny it should have, I imagine there's a lot of older language choices and processes that perhaps don't line up and things from that perspective. So just recommending that. I don't have any specific suggestions for what might need changing, but thank you.
I suppose just on that, Chair, I think it's fair to say that a lot of the constitution is written in legal rather than in English. There are some challenges in getting away from legal completely because we need to ensure that it's a proper legal process. But I've never been one to use words like here and after. I think they're horribly antiquated. I'm more than happy to try and turn it into plain English, which I think is ultimately what's needed. It then becomes a more workable document for everybody.
Okay. So I think the only outstanding issue that was raised by the speaker was that of what has come to be known as the interregnum between the outgoing administration and the installation of the new leader, I guess, and the formation of a new administration because obviously the leader and deputy leader both left the council. And I guess it'd be useful to outline how that worked. It's obviously a strange period, and I guess into officers, it's a pragmatic issue that something's in a change.
So the Constitution says that where you lose a leader and a deputy leader, then there is an anticipation that the chief operating officer would get in touch with the remainder of the executive, and that executive would look to elect a leader until to act pro tem. Sorry, Latin. To act until a formal determination. That I think is aimed at the situation where mid-term you have a change in leadership. I think if you had sought, or if the chief operating officer had sought between the election on the 4th of May and the annual meeting of council at the 26th, I believe it was, to install a temporary leader from a party which no longer had a majority, that would rather go directly contrary to the electorate's wishes. And therefore, given that there are no timescales set out in the Constitution, the chief operating officer clearly took the view that with a leader-elect in place, and no decisions that needed taking by a leader or by the executive in that intervening period, that it was not practicable or indeed not sensible to seek to try and put a temporary leadership in place for a period of sort of 2 weeks or so.
If the Constitution says one thing, which you've just explained that it does, the chief operating officer can just ignore it for the reasons that you outlined.
No, I think, I say the point is that there is no timescale set out in there. So it doesn't say the chief operating officer shall, within 2 working days, do X, Y, and Z. I think, as I say, if there had been a circumstance where an urgent decision was required by leadership, then things would have been different. And it may well be that he would have taken a pragmatic decision to seek the views of the outgoing executive as to whether they wanted to put somebody forwards to act as leader for that 2 week or so period. But of course, they would not be in a position to make a political decision which would then be overruled immediately afterwards. So it becomes a point of pragmatism. And I think, again, this is something that perhaps needs proper clarification in the Constitution about what happens when you have a change of leadership as a result of an election.
Yes. So again,
sadly, it's not quite.
Can you add that to your ever increasing list of things to look at the Constitution? It's just, I know I'm very, very aware that I think it was 2011 when James Alexander came in. He made a very big point about there was this big gap between Labour winning the election and then him being unable to implement his vision because he had to wait then for full council before he actually officially became the leader and they elected the executive. So this isn't the first time this has happened. And when it's a change of administration, it's pretty much going to happen all the time. And York seems to be getting into this flip-flop where there was no stable administration now from term to term. So yeah, I'm surprised it's not been looked at already.
Yeah, it comes back to, it's one of the limitations of the Constitution that it doesn't necessarily address perhaps the common scenarios that York has. So if you know that it's entirely conceivable that at an election you'll get a different administration in, well, actually, in the Constitution say that if that's the event, then the leader-elect shall be empowered to act as leader thereafter. Absolutely.
Okay. As long as it's going to be looked at, because
believe me, it's another item on the list that I maintain of things in the Constitution to look at.
That's sufficient.
I must say, of the councils I've been on, this has a very, very long interregnum, much longer than any other council. The previous one I was on before this, 10 days. In other words, the elections were on the Thursday, and the council meeting was on the following Tuesday or Monday to elect the leader and so on. That's how it was done. It was that quick. There was no interregnum. It was just in. I mean, that was in a situation where in the first term it was an independent stroke conservative administration. The second term was an independent liberal. So there was a change of Lib Dems. So there was a change of leadership. And then it went to a full Lib Dem. You know, there were changes every single time, but we got things together much more quickly. So there wasn't this paralysis in the decision making.
I think I mean, we can certainly look at, if necessary, if we get this scenario again, putting in an urgent meeting to make that decision. I think the challenge York has is you're doing that with a background of at the annual meeting, changing your Lord Mayor, which is a very large ceremonial matter. And that's where the rub comes, shall we call it, that actually you've got the mechanical processes which the annual meeting is there to deal with. So election of the leader, appointments to committees and things. And you have the large ceremonial element, which is the Lord Mayor making. The legislation usually specifies that we have a specific period. I believe it's 25 days from end of the election to when we must have an AGM. Most authorities, certainly after an election, will have their annual meeting towards the end of May. Because it takes that long to go through the process of working out committee places, working out who's in charge, getting papers together and getting everything out. As I say, I think we can probably address it more easily simply by including something in the Constitution which says in the event of a change of leadership as a result of an election, the leader-elect will have the authority and the power to act as leader from the point of clarity. I think the fun comes obviously if you've got a pure no overall control, and you can sometimes, you know, it can take a week or so before somebody decides who's actually going to be in charge. So.
Okay. Can't see any more questions at that point. We're looking at the recommendations. I guess the point we haven't touched on quite so much is the cultural change program. I think the only comment I'd made there is the need to highlight in that the aspects that will be relevant to officers and what actions are being taken to drive the other side of the coin change. And I guess it'd probably be useful, whether that's for us to look at the induction and training process that presumably we've all just been through, whilst it's still kind of fresh in our minds, that will then, you know, form the basis of what we do in 4 years' time or 3 and 8 months or whatever it is. So I think we've given you quite a list of constitutional amendments.
And there'll be many more, Chair.
I'm sure there'll be many more. Yeah, and I think generally the constitutional amendments are, you know, they're sort of slightly strange issues that crop up that, you know, and it's plugging gaps. I do have far more concerns about the budget amendment tomorrow, because that really shouldn't have been coming forward in the way that it is, and I don't think there's any sort of excusable reason for that. Certainly removing the rules of the game, I suppose, to facilitate it, it just isn't how it should be. So I would like to add an additional recommendation to that, which is perhaps to note the concern of the committee about the manner of that budget amendment, and, you know, further recommend that that is looked at through the constitutional review to address that for the future.
Absolutely happy to take that one, Chair.
Okay, if committee's happy with that, or
Is it of the committee or of the members of the committee, individual members?
well, it'll be of the committee as a whole. If there's not a general acceptance, then I guess we'd vote on it.
Yeah, I don't think there is a concern that the constitution is exercised in the way that it has, personally.
Okay. If there's a difference of opinion, then we'd vote, and the committee as a whole would, the view of the committee would be that. So,
Chair, as a non-voting member of the committee, should I caution you by trying to split yourselves up on party lines on an issue where, as an outsider, I would suggest to you there probably isn't a consensus, given the way in which the amendment has come forward to council. So all you'll do if you insist on having a vote is you're going to split your committee on a political issue. I think it's been acknowledged that the item could have been handled in different ways, but you've been assured it's a legitimate way of handling it. I think when you have your council meeting, you can make your points there, but I would urge you not to split in your first meeting an audit committee into political camps.
If I may suggest we take this forward via the changes to the constitution that can help clean up what we should do in the future in this situation.
Take your point. My own view is that this is serious enough that a formal view of the committee would be helpful, and that would make a very clear point that we don't think this is the way that it should be going. So I would like to put that to a vote. Councillor Melly?
I think what we heard from the monitoring officer is that there isn't a way within the constitution and within the standing orders to do it in a way that is orderly or not messy. It's not something that has a mechanism to do it, and so a creative way of doing it had to be found. There is different ways of doing it which are within the rules, legal, allowed, and this is one of those ways.
Except that it was done in the normal ways in 2011, 2015, 2019. There was a motion.
We haven't heard that those ways were more valid than the way that is
Those ways didn't involve the removal of standing orders and the removal of the rules, so that we could do something that clearly wasn't within them.
Chair, could I ask for guidance?
But there isn't a way of doing it within them, is what we've been told. There was.
To be clear, there is no defined way of it happening. So the constitution doesn't say, if you want to do an amendment to the budget, this is how you do it. There have been clearly precedents from previous years when this has happened. This is not being done in the same way. As I said, there's not much more I can say other than it's lawful. It's slightly inelegant, as I say. But as the constitution is, as I say, remarkably silent on it, it is certainly something that will be picked up as part of any constitutional amendments, and you'll get to see those in due course. I think the point I would make is we are where we are at this point.
Chair, I'm not a politician. I'm a member of this committee without a vote, which is sometimes helpful. I really would urge you not to start dividing yourself on something which wasn't on the agenda, on an issue which has a lot of detail and emotion, which I believe is politically divisive. And the one thing the audit committee of the organisation has got to be is a trust-based way of looking at the matters overall. You will have opportunities, I assume, at a meeting tomorrow where this issue is on the agenda to have a discussion about why and how it's on the agenda. It wasn't on the agenda here. And, well, I don't get a vote on it.
Thank you. Councillor Fisher.
I was just going to say there are precedents for this. There have been methods for doing this in 2011, 2015. I think there was an amended budget, and 2019 there was an amended budget. Was it that this constitution has changed things so that there is no defined way of doing it? Because I believe there was a defined way of doing it in the previous constitution. In case I take some of the blame because I was on the party that wrote the new constitution.
I think all I can say is there is no provision in this constitution. So if it previously existed, and obviously, as you're aware, I'm a relative newcomer to York. If it previously existed in the constitution, then it's clearly been removed.
Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I guess my point that I'm making is that I don't think there's any indication from any member here that there's a concern that anything hasn't been followed by the book. It just isn't the preferred approach of some of the members of this table, around this table. And the solution to that is to specify going forward in the constitution fixes. I'm obviously very happy for us to have a vote on as a committee on whatever it is that the chair would like us to have a vote on. But it feels to me like we're having a vote on which of two existing mechanisms that are both valid is preferable based on what's been done in previous years, rather than whether governance has been followed or not, which I think is the purpose of this committee. So I'll go with your approach on this, but I think that the constitution will be fixed in the coming months to make sure that we've got a clear, this is the way it should be done in the future.
I think if you have a set of rules, then you don't just say we're going to remove those rules, but then that's all fine. We all have to operate within those, or we don't know how we're playing the game. And that, I think, is the point that I'm trying to make. And I am concerned about that. And that is why I would like the committee to express a view on that. And I think it's probably time to move on this, because I don't think we're going to get to a point where we agree one way or the other. So I'll just ask if anybody's willing to second that. So if they're not, this will be very quick. Okay, Councillor Healy. Okay. If there are any urgent further points that people want to make, Councillor Melling.
Well, just that we've already heard from on the monitoring officer that there are other occasions when standing orders have been suspended or deviated from, such as rearranging the order of the agenda. And there's no I don't think there's any suggestion that just the act of doing something that doesn't quite fit within the standing orders is in itself a governance issue. It's up to the consent of the full council. And we haven't heard until tomorrow whether or not it has the consent of full council to deviate from the standing orders for this purpose. So we can't say that it's a problem until we know whether there's been a vote on whether it's an acceptable process tomorrow.
I think the point is a concern about this process being used in this way, but I think we've reached the point where we both know each other's points.
Could I briefly just, sorry, because I think this is partly my fault, my lack of understanding and experience with the Constitution, because I think I had originally suggested that the amendment could be moved as a report of either the leader or the executive member. I hadn't appreciated that that would mean that standing orders had to be suspended in order to move it up the agenda. So members around the table are right. In previous times, I've been here since 1996, and we've probably done an emergency budget after an election pretty much every 4 to 8 years, and it has previously been a motion, but I don't think I understood that meant we'd have to suspend standing orders. So I think partly I'm just acknowledging my responsibility in this, in creating this slight moment of chaos, and that I think it's a learning experience for myself and Bryn in terms of just getting a hold of the process a bit more, and to reassure you that there was nothing intended to be underhand or disingenuous about this. I think it's just my kind of lack of knowledge of the detail of council and standing orders that, to me, this seemed the easiest way to bring a budget amendment to full council with the relevant context and additional information, rather than just a list of numbers on a spreadsheet. So I just thought I'd mention that in case people were thinking that somehow there was something underhand going on. That's not the case.
No, thank you. There's no implication of underhand or that any blame needs to be assigned. It's just simply that there's a degree of concern about the way that this has been brought forward, and we'd like it to be addressed in the Constitution as soon as possible, which I think is a relatively innocuous proposal. But if we could move then to the vote on that.
And what was the wording exactly on that there is a concern and it would like to be addressed in the Constitution? Was that the phrasing?
Yeah, so we've got a concern about the manner in which the budget amendment is being brought forward at the full council meeting, and we would like to see that addressed in a future review of the Constitution to make it clearer the mechanisms through which such budget amendments can be brought in future.
Can we add something in that you shouldn't plan on suspending standing orders? There should be no reason for that. It shouldn't be a planned event.
Okay. I think that does broaden it out quite a bit from there, doesn't it? And perhaps that's just something we could look at in the more general Constitution review, how those are managed. Councillor Fisher.
I'd leave that out. I think I would just say we are concerned about the way it's been done, and we just recommend. There's no blame. No, we're not saying to any particular person, you did this deliberately for a reason. It's just that we want to make sure that it's done better next time.
Yes,
simple as that.
Councillor Melly, and then we will move.
My slight issue with that proposed wording is that I think there's some of that which we can all agree with and some that we can't. It sounds like there's consensus that we want this, when the Constitution is being reviewed anyway, we want this addressed, because there currently isn't a process for doing a budget amendment. I think it's just the first half of what you want us to vote on, which will cause a split unnecessarily, because the bit that is actually actionable, I think we all agree on it, but we're going to have a split, and a disagreement within the committee in our first committee meeting based on the first half part of the vote, which isn't actually productive or lead to any action being taken, and maybe it's just unnecessary.
I think it's important to note the strength feeling about this and the concern that's raised. And I think there's been a proposal which has been seconded. I think it's time to draw a line in the sand on this one and take a view. So I'm happy then to move to a vote. So if I could all see all those then in favour of that. All those against? Any abstentions? Okay, so that is passed. So in terms of the other recommendations we've got then, so to note the contents of the report, provide the suggested topics of the constitutional amendments, many of which we've had sort of thrown at you a little.
Well ventilated, Chair.
Presumably you can work your way back through the YouTube after and pick them out. I'm sure members as well will come up with other ideas, and perhaps it's worth emailing the, councillors as a whole to ask whether there's any ideas. Give a bit of a time frame for when that might come forward.
I think I can say, Chair, confidently, it will come forward in pieces because I don't want to overwhelm anybody with 700 pages.
And then I didn't hear any dissension on the direction of travel, unless Tony's about to dissent.
Well, I was going to say, thank goodness we're not going to get 750 pages dumped on us and a week before the actual meeting and have to try and digest it and analyse it and try and figure out whether everything had actually been done, because it was.
Okay, so I think we're all generally happy with the remaining recommendations. Seeing nods, so I'll take that as gone. So thank you very much. We move on then to item 10, which is the work plan. And I think, Bryn, is there anything to talk through? I mean, obviously there's a lot of things listed. A point was made about the number of meetings, and I think potentially it looks like into 2024 that the frequency will pick up.
Yes,
we're having meetings in January and March. Have you got an idea of the general pattern sort of beyond the end of this year?
I think it would probably replicate to some degree this. The challenge we had obviously for this year's meeting schedule is pretty much all of May is written off, because you had the period between the elections and the annual meeting when strictly there are no councillors appointed to any committees. So May is lost every 4 years because of the elections. That won't be the case next year. So it's entirely conceivable that there'll be one of these in May as well. Because if you look at the pattern, you would have May, July, September. So you're looking at sort of every 2 months. And then as you get closer to particularly the budget, things tend to pick up a little more.
So I think we're just noting at the moment the content of this. I think if there are any specific areas members would wish the committee to look at, it's worth feeding them in. I think probably one of the key things to add in is the governance arrangements around the new combined authority. And I think there was a bit of because these dates are wrong, aren't they? There was a bit of a plan to piggyback, I guess, on the report going to the devolution committee to perhaps come here, because we happen to be having a meeting a week or two before, at which members could discuss that report, and then those be incorporated or passed on to the devolution committee later. Is that a reasonable?
I think my understanding is that's the intention, Chair. Obviously, once we have a substantial degree of influence at the moment, because we are working up how the combined authority will be created. Once the combined authority is a legal entity, which best estimates at the moment is probably towards the end of November, it then becomes its own local authority, and therefore has a far greater influence and self-determination. We will still obviously have representation on the committee itself. So between the creation of the authority and the election of the mayor, you will have a combined authority with 2 members from North Yorkshire, 2 members from the City of York, forming its principal committee. Once the mayor is elected, you will then have a mayoral combined authority, which will have the mayor included in that. But also there will be scrutiny arrangements, there will be audit and governance arrangements that the combined authority has to create for itself. And it will have all of those committees available. and members from both authorities will be appointed to each of those committees.
So I think that would be useful if it came. I assume everybody's reasonably happy with that. I think that's the only specific addition we've got at the moment. But if members do have any areas, I guess they'd like us to look at that come up, it'd be worth feeding that in, and we can see if we can.
We'll be happy to try and accommodate, Chair.
No other issues on that? Okay. So if we can move on then to item 11, and I assume that the best thing to do on this is to discuss we can discuss the first part and save any discussion on the salmon papers to a private session. So I guess if members just in this item, just be careful not to stray into the salmon papers until we do go into a private session. But I think we've got. Thank you very much for sitting through.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just start with the introductions, if that's okay. So I'm Max Thomas. I'm Council's Head of Internal Audit, but I actually am employed by Verito, and you probably know this, but Verito is a shared service, and the company is jointly owned by York and North Yorkshire. So I've got two of my colleagues with me tonight, so I'll let them introduce them.
Thank you, Max. Thank you, Chair. So my name's Conor Munro. I'm Assistant Director, Audit Assurance at Verito. So in this particular context, I'm responsible for overseeing delivery of internal audit services at City of York Council.
The laptops just block the sounds.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Jonathan Dodsworth, and I manage the counter fraud function on behalf of Verito for City of York Council.
Yes, I'll just briefly go through the report. So this is our annual report. So it's designed to inform the Committee of Internal Audit and Counter Fraud work that we've completed during the year. The report's in two parts. Annex 1 covers the internal audit element of the work programme, and Annex 2 the counter fraud element. Just going to Annex 1. This lists the reports, internal audit reports we've finalised or issued in draft, plus other work that we've completed in the period. For the actual the reports that have been finalised, those are listed in Appendix A. It shows when the details of those audits were reported to this committee, as well as the opinion that we provided. Since the last progress report, we've finalised 5 audits. So there's a summary of the sort of findings from those audits. And importantly, the actions that management have agreed to take where we identified areas for improvement. Where there are areas for improvement, we always agree an action plan with management, and we will follow up those actions to make sure that they've been implemented. So the report does include details of the follow-up work that we've done during the year. Taken together, all this audit work allows us to provide an overall opinion on the Council's framework of governance, risk management and control. And that opinion is given in paragraph 15. And for this year, it is a reasonable assurance opinion. We also are required to identify any significant control weaknesses, which we would ask the Council to consider including in the annual governance statement. This year, there weren't any significant control weaknesses, so all the issues that we did identify sort of didn't meet that threshold for highlighting. Finally, you do need to have confidence that the internal audit work has been done to a professional standard, and you can therefore place reliance on the opinion. We do that by setting out our quality assurance and improvement programme, and again that's included in the report. And then just finally, Annex 2 summarises the internal audit activities and the work that we've undertaken during the year. Happy to take any questions on the report.
Okay, thank you. Is there any questions? Any questions on the white papers, Councillor Rose?
Just on the savings plans key issue on page 250, just the only one that says reasonable assurance rather than substantial assurance, and just seeing if your perspective is that that's improved, and looking at the savings plans for years ahead are more likely to be achieved in year rather than, as appears here, that the delay in creating them took too long.
Okay, what I would say is, I mean, we've highlighted some issues, obviously, all within one directorate, really. We will be following up to make sure that what's been set out as sort of management action has actually taken place.
Yes, absolutely.
Could I raise one which relates to really the question from a member of the public, which is he was raising the issues about ordering documentation process, and here it's described as being substantial assurance that ordering credit payments are as they should be. I'm assuming that covers off his comment that although there has been a significant increase in number of orders placed without it being signed off by the budget holder, you are reasonably comfortable that that is not a serious statistical issue.
Well, I think we do think it's an issue, and I think it's fair to say that the sort of trend has been in the wrong direction. So we've been highlighting this as an issue for a number of years. Having said that, all other aspects of the process were good. So that's the reason for it.
Could I do the follow-up on that? And my follow-up on that would therefore be, what systems are there in place if over several years is a continuing problem? In other environments, the relevant director or the relevant cabinet member, if it was that, would have been sitting here, having produced a report and explaining why the situation has improved. Now, that's not in local government. That would be in other environments. You would not allow the director responsible for something not to appear sadly in front of the audit committee to explain why, if it's already gone through the executive system and the executive system hasn't sorted it out, which it should have done, then the audit committee could be reasonably asking the person who they think most responsible, be that the member of the political member of the executive or the director of the function responsible. It is now been X and Y and Z years. What's the timescale? Why is it being done? In other words, what's the process rather than it simply being repeated within the system? If it's being brought to an audit committee regularly that there is a problem, it's maybe a constitution issue, which is where I was coming back to, which is what is the role of the audit committee in relation to a repeated problem which has been highlighted by audit over time, hasn't been corrected by directors. Where does it go next? Another audit report isn't the best way of doing it.
I think presumably we could add it to our work plan and invite the relevant exec member or director if we so wish. I think that'd be a recommendation that would come out of the item if that was what people wanted, and somebody would put that forward, I guess. I will just note that obviously the same set of questions could be asked in the sort of exempt section as now, and I suppose it's worth thinking. Obviously, it is important for some of these issues to be aired in public, so there's a balance to be struck between the answer you might get, which might be more details in the exempt bit, but obviously that's more a general point to note, I guess. If there are any more questions on the Councillor Melly.
I have a question on the subject of exit payments, because it says here in your report Oh, 263. Just it says that the annual review due in October 2022 hadn't been done as of May. That was 2 months ago. Has there been any further liaising since then? Do you know if that has been started yet?
I don't know. I mean, we've highlighted it's an issue, but whether we can check whether there's been any development on that.
Just because the second annual review is due soon. Thanks.
If I can just jump in on that, Chair, I think it's probably worth the committee being aware that since the details set out in there in 2021, the government has changed the rules on exit payments anyway. So actually they're now called special severance payments, and there's a very specific set of rules that have to be followed. So we've almost been overtaken by circumstance. There are specific authorization levels set out by the government as to who needs to sign off what. So, you know, up to 20,000 needs to be this level, 20 to 100,000 needs to be this level, beyond 100,000 it's council. And that latter provision has been in for a little while. So the rules about what you can and can't do have substantially changed. So I think severance payments, as they're now called, are quite rare in local authorities anymore.
Okay, Councillor Rose.
Probably shouldn't take 9 months to review though from that point, that an annual review. So it might be worth having from whoever's most appropriate an update at the next meeting on where we stand, noting that if the next meeting is September and it's an October review, maybe it's not worth doing two in 2 months, but it'd be good to get an update on why it's taking so long and what it looks like now. Thank you.
Councillor Melling.
What's included in exit payments or severance payments? Is it all sorts of payments, including pension contributions and?
Yeah, so special severance payments. I think the way to consider this is if it is a non-contractual payment, then you are into special severance payments in any event. So you would need to consider things like pension strain as well as direct costs to the individual. So if you take an example, the council might pay somebody £20,000 on redundancy, and that's their direct payment to them. But actually, depending on their age, there will be a large pension strain that goes along with that. That is a contractual entitlement. So the council has no alternative but to pay it. So it is not something that requires sign off by anybody other than Chief Finance Officer, because that's the process. Because if we don't pay that, we get sued through Employment Tribunal and we lose. There's no alternative. So I can happily circulate to the committee the guidance from central government on special severance payments if you're of interest.
I think that'd be worth doing. Whether or not members read it is up to them. Councillor Healy.
Super quickly, on that point, with the government guidance that you're going to send, it might be worthwhile sending to the new members of the committee the actual reports and all of the various reports around this subject, as it makes quite interesting reading, and it's one of the main reasons why we've got this sort of officer member review going on. So yeah, it's a good read. But
are members comfortable if I simply send links to the various committees?
Yeah, well, don't send it to me because I'm not on the committee. No problem.
Yeah.
I can't see any further questions. I've just got a couple of very quick ones. So it mentions the external assessment. It says at least once every 5 years. Do you know when the next one's due?
It's taking place as we speak.
Okay.
So we'll hopefully have the result in by the end of August, early September. So we should be able to report to the following audit committee.
Okay. Probably a kind of newbie question is, the list of things that are being audited is quite a sort of seemingly random list. How do you sort of decide what is going to be audited, and is there a forward plan of what's coming up over the next year or 2 years? Do you know what hasn't been done for 10 years that should be done? And is that anywhere that?
If I just summarise very quickly, it is a risk-based very flexible plan. So traditionally, you would have had a sort of very fixed plan. You might even had a 5-year plan. Modern audit techniques don't work that way. We have to respond to the current sort of risks facing the council. So we have a risk assessment which we are updating on a continuous basis. So the programme of work is being reviewed and updated all the time. Now, at the start of the year, so I think it was April, we brought the work programme for the year, and it did identify all the areas we were going to audit, and we had a discussion with the audit committee about any other areas that the audit committee thought it was useful for us to look at. So there's that sort of discussion. We had a program, we agreed, the programme was agreed, and through our progress reports, we will be updating that programme. We'll come back to the committee saying, these are the audits we're working on currently, these are the audits we're planning to do next, and these are the audits we will do later in the year. But it's a continuously changing program.
Okay, thank you.
If I can help, Chair, you'll find the report and the annual internal audit and counter fraud work programme attached to the agenda from the 15th of March meeting from this committee. So
Fantastic. If there are no further questions for this part of the agenda item, if we're happy then to move into the sort of exempt private session, and sorry. There is no, should also have said